Chapter 1156. Woo woo. A huge dragon with a mouth full of fierce teeth let out a low cry like that of a small animal. This scene was as strange as it could be. The other side muttered, "I don't have the face to see other people of my race. Shame. What a disgrace." On one side, the giant black dragon was obediently descending from the sky, and the tribal chiefs were very conflicted. If they hadn't clearly seen that the one sitting on the back of the dragon was Xueqi was holding a long dark blue magic rain, and the black dragon's chest had the insignia of the Alliance and the Marcus family, they would have probably turned around and run. Even so, the other troll warriors couldn't help but tighten their grip on the weapons in their hands when they saw such an enormous beast sweep away the sand and pebbles, and when she looked at them with her fierce and vivid golden eyes. Grom actually wanted to run, not because he was afraid of death, but because he was ashamed. Looking at Xueqi, who jumped down from the back of the black dragon, Lord Howl's rough mouth with fangs wriggled for a long time, and finally looked straight into Xueqi's eyes. "It seems I owe you another life. If you were an orc, you would have earned my life and loyalty." Xueqi shrugged. "Unfortunately, I'm not." Wujin quickly interrupted. "Did you know that Nefarian was in Blackwing's nest?" Wujin did not want to raise such a question, but Grom felt that he owed Xueqi too much. If a veteran expert like Grom made a big event that crossed races and factions to join the human race, it would be very, very troublesome. Even as wise as Wujin was, the only way he could think of was to interrupt. Xueqi turned to look at Wujin and sighed. "I know that Nefarian, the king of the Black Dragons, is standing behind Rend Blackhand, but according to my understanding of Nefarian, coupled with Onyxia's testimony, I think that unless someone fought in front of Nefarian's highest throne in Blackwing's nest, with his pride, he would never personally attack anyone." Wujin was suddenly speechless, unable to say anything else. At this time, Grom, who was still on the stretcher, waved his hand. "Enough, Xueqi. I was clear about my identity and the mission on my shoulders. No matter what happened, the fact that the Black Hand brothers had betrayed the tribe was still an ironclad fact. Besides, the Alliance is using the Horde to restrain Nefarian. Aren't we also using the Alliance to deal with Ragnaros?" Grom's open and above-board words made Wujin feel as if his neck was being choked, and he was unable to speak for a long time. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh. Grom gritted his teeth in pain. The Horde needs the Alliance's power, and the Alliance needs the Horde's power. Please help the tribe this time, and the tribe will definitely repay you. As for me, as long as I succeed, I won't even frown even if I have to incinerate my soul. A man, a real man, a spit, a nail. Even though Xueqi had expected this, he was still moved by Grom's request. Xueqi smiled and reached out his hand to shake Grom's huge and scarred hand. "Welcome back to the Alliance and the Horde." At this moment, Dworkin and Kane were visibly relieved. In any case, with the support of the Alliance, at least the situation would not collapse. At this time, Dworkin finally asked a question that he had always wanted to ask. "Xueqi, is the Black Dragon behind you, the previous Onyxia?" In fact, it was not only the heroes of the Horde who were confused, but the Alliance was also very troubled. The first time was when Deathwing pretended to be the Lord of Presto and almost became the King of Alterac. The second time was when Onyxia pretended to be Countess Katrana and almost stole the supreme power of Stormwind. In addition to strong combat power, the second label of the Black Dragon race was that they were sinister and cunning. However, such a powerful and cunning Black Dragon, and the princess of the Black Dragon race, was now tied to Xueqi's hand, quietly staying behind Xueqi as a backdrop. This was really incredible. She won't betray me now, right? She's my exclusive mount for the time being. Mount? The eyelids of several big bosses of the Horde, Dworkin, Grom, Kane, and Varrock, twitched wildly. In the poor Horde, only the chief was qualified to have a wyvern as a mount. All right. Comparisons were odious. When comparing goods, you have to throw them away. Their mounts were dragons, and so was Xueqi's. But wyverns, even if they had the word dragon in their name, were actually just third-rate subspecies of dragons. How could they compare with Xueqi's mount? As a tribe that once had a red dragon mount, the older generation of orcs was very clear about how big the gap in strength was. It was already amazing to be able to ride a 1,000-year-old adult dragon. No one thought that they could ride an ancient dragon. Not to mention the princess of the Black Dragon, who was a demigod. The kind of shock that seemed to dislocate their jaws were all written on the faces of the big bosses of the Horde. There was no difficulty in stuffing an ostrich egg into their gaping mouths. At this time, a terrible draconic aura rose behind Xueqi. Xueqi, you bastard! When did I recognize you as my master? Don't think too highly of yourself. I just deceived you and took the opportunity to heal my wounds. Today, I will take this opportunity to rebel. Before the Princess of the Black Dragon could finish her declaration of rebellion, a huge arcane energy palm descended from the sky and directly pressed on Nixia's dragon head, pressing her dragon mouth to the ground. For a moment, Wajin felt that Onyxia actually wanted to resist. She was on par with Valestras and dodged the dragon breath that was as fast as a gust of wind, but in front of Duke, she felt an inexplicable sense of awe. Be it her reaction or movement, she was clearly slower than Duke. The result of her hesitation was that her huge dragon head was pressed down by the magic hand and kept rubbing on the ground. Bastard master! You will regret it. You will definitely regret it. Onyxia seemed to be struggling uncontrollably, and did not notice that the way she addressed Duke had changed. Hey, do you really want to rebel? You're going to tear down the tiles if you don't get a beating for 3 days? Today, I will let you have a taste of the dragon taming whip. Xueqi raised his hand and a special 9-tailed whip appeared. It was hard to imagine that such a huge black dragon would show a timid expression in front of a small 9-tailed whip that was less than half a meter long. Don't hit me. I'm sorry. Master Xueqi, I'm sorry. I was wrong. The huge black dragon whimpered like a small animal. Chapter 1157. Under the watchful eyes of the Horde powerhouses, the huge black dragon shrank rapidly. Under the effect of ultimate transformation, in just a second, the black dragon disappeared and was replaced by a timid noblewoman. She clutched her red dress with both hands and bit her lower lip. Her beautiful face was full of a pitiful expression. She was so pitiful. No one would have thought that just a moment ago, she was an arrogant black dragon with her nose in the air. If they had not witnessed all of this with their own eyes, anyone would have thought that she was a little wife who had been bullied, and not a ferocious black dragon. Grom and the other Horde powerhouses once again felt that their worldview had been turned upside down. The ancient red dragon, who was originally a righteous one, had fallen into the claws of evil. The black dragon princess, who was originally a villain of the evil faction, had become a human's mount, shouting the name of evil while doing things of justice. What kind of comedy was this? Xueqi did not give them more time to daydream. He directly opened a portal and said, "Let's not talk about anything else. Go back to Stormwind City and rest for a while. The Alliance still needs the strength of the Horde powerhouses." Wajin looked up and said, "Please allow us to contact Chief Sar." No problem. The entire Blackrock Mountain had been fortified. Nefarian had obviously put in a lot of effort to manage this place. In such a rich fire element area, it was easier to repel other elements. Nefarian also used this reason to prevent other magic messages. For others, it was really difficult to open a portal here. But Blackrock Mountain was not Nefarian's territory. Below his lair was Ragnaros's territory. Under the premise that many nodes of the molten core had been destroyed, Xueqi's teleportation became possible. Suddenly returning from the blazing hell and breathing the clean air, Wajin, Grom and the others felt like they had been in a lifetime. With a call from Duke, a team of priests from the Storm Cathedral ran out to heal them. There was even an elite team of thieves who sneaked into Blackrock Mountain to rescue the surviving orc warriors. Orcs, trolls and Tauren were all relatively simple races. For this, the Horde powerhouses were very grateful. After settling them down, Xueqi turned his head and glanced at the Black Dragon Princess who was shivering behind him. His body recovered a little. His temper flared up again. The person in front of her was clearly a human, but in Onyxia's eyes, Xueqi was 100 million times scarier than the demons of the Burning Legion. What do you want? Let me tell you. I'm the dignified princess of the Dark Dragon, Onyxia. Let's not talk about anything else for now. I'm only asking for the corresponding position based on my strength. Is that wrong? Onyxia's lips were trembling in human form. Xueqi chuckled. Of course, in the eyes of a certain female dragon, it was a sinister grin. If not for that declaration of rebellion, I might have been able to accept it. However, the premise of rebelling was to be dealt with. Do you dare to say that at that moment, you didn't have any thoughts of rebellion? No. Onyxia was the first to reply. Then, her aura weakened a little. Probably not. Come here. Duque grabbed Onyxia's wrist and opened a portal to drag her back to Duke Marcus' residence in Stormwind City. When Duque dragged Onyxia through the portal of the Duke's residence, the gatekeeping wizards and guards were stunned for a moment, and then immediately lowered their heads. Chief Steward Makarov hurried over and waved his hand. The servants and guards of the Duke's residence immediately retreated from the rooms and corridors that Duque passed through like a tide. Onyxia was dragged away like a weak girl. She seemed to have forgotten that even in her human form, she still had the power of a dragon that could kill mortals in seconds. In her perception, Duque's strength was so insignificant that she could tear this seemingly weak human wizard into pieces with just a little bit of force. She knew very well what would happen to her if she followed him. As arrogant as she was, she also had the urge to break free from this restraint. During the days when she was separated from Duque, she even secretly studied soul magic. A magic layman like Turalian could not monitor her at all. She had already found and obtained what she wanted. It was a soul countermagic that originated from ancient times. As long as Duque did not control her in the first 3 seconds of her casting, she could directly attack Duque's soul, and then obtain victory in a direct confrontation between souls. She could even turn around and control Duque's soul. At that time, all the humiliation she had endured, all the torture she had suffered, could all be avenged in one go. Yes, just that one flaw. That one opportunity. However, at this moment, she bit her lip and was dragged away like a puppet. When they finally reached the bedroom, Duque closed the door and threw her to the ground. She knelt in fear. Of course, she knew that the level of magic protection here was far inferior to that of Duque's old nest, Karazhan. She even felt countless times that she could destroy Duque at any time. But every time she wanted to do it, she would think of the magical scene of Duque's resurrection at the Lake of Lovers. That was not simply immortality, but a magical power that was more similar to time reversal. If it was really time magic, then for Onyxia, it would be truly unsolvable. Failure had made her a little cowardly, and she began to constantly tell herself, "I can't act rashly before I grasp the secret that he cannot be destroyed." She did not realize that it was her cowardly attitude that caused her to lose the courage to resist Duke and continue to succumb to him. It was like an elephant in a Thai zoo. Many tourists expressed surprise that an elephant weighing 7 or 8 tons would be chained by a chain the size of a thumb. In fact, elephants had experienced countless struggles against the chains when they were young and failed miserably. As a result, when they grew up, they still subconsciously believed that they could not break free from such chains. As soon as Duque approached, Onyxia subconsciously shrank toward the wall. Unknowingly, her knees were against the corner of the wall, and her chest and face were pressed against the cold wall. What welcomed her was not a whip, but a gentle touch. Duque said softly, "Idiot, actually being my mount is your ultimate salvation." In the spiritual realm, Duque once again transmitted the video processed by the system into the Princess of the Black Dragon's mind. It was a realistic image after a lot of post-processing by the system. She saw her dragon head being hung on the gate of Stormwind City again and again. She clearly saw the despair and final ferociousness on her dragon face. Is this my ultimate fate in other timelines? A teardrop rolled down Onyxia's beautiful face. Chapter 1158. In the movies before Duque transmigrated, special effects and no special effects were 2 different worlds. For example, the Scarlet Witch without special effects was like a psychopath when she performed. With special effects, she was an omnipotent mutant. Although the special effects that Duque sent to Onyxia during the psychic attack weren't 50%, they weren't clear and exquisite enough. It was more like a kind of confusing inducement. This time, no matter how she looked at it, it looked like something that came from the river of time. Onyxia knew very well why Duque had disappeared for 4 years. She had always been fearful of this peerless powerhouse who had conquered for 10,000 years and tricked the Burning Legion. Now that Duque had given her something, it further solidified Duque's position as the Master of Fate. No, at least the Peeper of Fate. How could Onyxia not be afraid? At this time, Duque's voice seemed to contain the magic of fate, full of surging power. Those who block the general trend of fate, they will be crushed into pieces. So what if they are powerful? What happened to Nethario, the Wing of Death? What happened to Sargeras, the King of Demons? There's also Archimonde, whose bones are still hanging on a dead tree on Mount Hyjal. Yes, They may be resurrected, but unfortunately, that would only be a deeper failure for them. Fate will ultimately be in the hands of mortals like us. Onyxia's delicate body trembled non-stop. Even though she knew that this was actually Duque's pressure on her, she had to believe it. Too many powerhouses had already fallen to Azeroth. This was more like a curse. An irresistible curse of fate. Onyxia felt as if she could hardly breathe, as if she had returned to the moment when she was struggling for her life in the Twilight Forest. Pain, despair, helplessness. She knew that Duque's words were more like a trap to deliberately make her sink and give up on herself. But she always felt that as long as she still wanted to live, it would be impossible to escape from Duque's clutches. Her body had recovered a lot, but she didn't have the courage. The short period of freedom he had in the watchtower when he had nothing better to do was more like the last illusion before he sank into oblivion. Onyxia suddenly understood why her mother had been hiding from her father all her life even though she was so powerful. With the left side of her face pressed against the cold wall, Onyxia's sexy red lips spat out a sentence. Black dragons don't believe in feelings, nor do they believe in promises. However, if a female dragon were to be bitten on the back of the neck, that is fatal. No matter how unwilling she is, she would give up resisting and recognize the other party as her conqueror. She would even be willing to bear the other party's children. After saying that, Onyxia silently twisted her neck, making her fair neck look even more slender. Duque understood tacitly and gently pushed aside Onyxia's cloud-like black hair that fell on her shoulders. Then, he revealed his white teeth and gently bit the back of Onyxia's neck. That soft texture made it impossible to imagine that this was actually the neck of an extremely sinister and cruel black dragon. Onyxia's body trembled, and another drop of dragon's tear slipped down her face. However, when the dragon-taming whip penetrated the dragon's cave with ease, Onyxia suddenly let out a long and relieved dragon roar. Ho ho ho. From now on, you're my mount. If you mess around in the Alliance, it's like slapping my face. I won't let you go. If you really do something that I can't protect you from, I can only let the other powerhouses hang your head at the gate of Storm City. You may meet your big brother soon. He and I are not on the same side. Very good. Come, take my 256 styles of dragon-taming whip first. Woo-woo. Both of them couldn't sleep the whole night. At noon, Duque met Xueqi and the others. These guys actually became energetic. It could only be said that the big men of the tribe all had monster-level recovery abilities. Needless to say, Xueqi was a troll. When Duque urgently called Benedictus to help him expel the fire elemental power in his body, Xueqi's broken arm began to regenerate at a high speed. Grom, Varrock, and Cain were not much worse off. When the holy light healed their wounds, these guys actually cried out that they were hungry at 1 o'clock in the morning. This made the royal chefs of Storm Stronghold wake up in the middle of the night and cook for them for most of the night. These guys ate and drank until 5 o'clock in the morning before they fell asleep with their stomachs full and satisfied. Duque looked at them, who slept until 12 o'clock, and could not imagine their miserable appearance yesterday. Xueqi also glanced at the humanoid Onyxia standing quietly behind Duque. Before Duque could answer, Onyxia had already answered, "No. After a good taste of the dragon-taming whip, I will be obedient." It had to be said that as Countess Catrana and Rosso, the princess of the Black Dragon was definitely at the level of a movie queen. Even Xueqi could not imagine that this dragon-taming whip was not the dragon-taming whip. Her complex expression of hatred, indignation, fear, and submission made Xueqi immediately believe that Duque did not completely control her. Only Duque, who was connected to her soul, could feel the calmness and submission coming from her soul. Grom stepped forward. "We have contacted Chief Sar, and he has ordered that the Blackrock Spire incident will be led by the Alliance, and the rest of us will fully support the Alliance's actions. So, give the order. Commander Duque." Duque did not refuse. For a true martial artist, not even a minute of rest was torture. Especially the shame brought by the death of 3,000 soldiers, they could not sleep well. Duque waved his hand. "Nefarian needs time and so do we. So, I give the order to kill the Fire Demon King Ragnaros first." "Understood." Duque turned his head. "Onyxia, you too." "Humph." Onyxia tilted her head and snorted as a reply. Duque looked to the northeast of Stormwind City, where the Blackrock Spire was located. "Nefarian, wash your neck and wait to be slaughtered." This was different from before. When the fulcrum of the molten core was still intact, opening a portal was simply an extravagant hope. Even as a Breaking Dawn mage, Xueqi could not do it. But now it was completely different. With the portal, even if Nefarian dared to come out, Xueqi was confident that he could deal with him immediately. Now, apart from the Fire Demon King himself, no one else could stop them in the molten core. Below the molten core, Xueqi's lovers were still a little disappointed that Xueqi did not come to the hot spring to attack. When they saw the angry eyes of the Horde's elders who kept calling the Black Dragon bastard, they understood the answer. It turned out that Xueqi had gone to save the day. Chapter 1159. However, would the crowd ignore Onyxia who was standing behind Duke? How is that possible? More than half of the most powerful paladins in the Alliance were here. Almost as soon as Onyxia stepped through the portal, they sensed the presence of the Black Dragon Princess. Unexpectedly, they did not sense a strong evil aura or will. Of course, the dragon race did not rely on dark energy to survive. But the Black Dragon Princess who appeared in front of them at this moment had completely subverted their impression. She appeared in her dragon form on Lover's Island, full of anger and absolute arrogance. That was the domineering attitude of believing that she could solve all problems with power even after being exposed. Now, no matter how she tried to hide, she could only hide from the orcs in the tribe. Not to mention the Alliance, even Wajin might not be able to fool them all. Even though the firebird on her body had proved that her body had recovered, she hid behind Xueqi unconsciously, trying to use Xueqi to block everyone's sight. However, her beautiful face, sexy body, and bright clothes that never changed made her one of the focal points of the crowd no matter how hard she tried to hide. She gave off a very contradictory feeling. Aurelia took a step forward, and the Black Dragon Princess almost instinctively wanted to step back, but Xueqi grabbed her arm. This was obviously a little rude for a lady, but Onyxia lowered her head. Yo! Xueqi, aren't you going to introduce this lady to us? Although the Windrunner's elder sister used the calmest tone, but in the ears of the Black Dragon, it sounded like a joke. Xueqi looked up. My new mount. Xueqi snapped his fingers. Onyxia, show everyone. Slow down, don't scare people. In the end, Xueqi did not forget to inform Duke Hadasis. Tell your men to stay away, don't get allergic when you see the Black Dragon. A little helpless, a little sad, and a little resigned. After letting out a soft sigh, everyone watched as the deep black eyes of the Duchess in a luxurious red dress with black trimmings gradually turned into a flowing golden color. Slender black scales gradually appeared on her forehead and cheeks, glistening in the light of the flowing lava in the distance. She raised her snow-white neck and let out a long howl, her long black hair flying behind her head. When her waterfall-like hair disappeared like a dream, a pair of black wings with holes grew on her back. His 4 limbs had turned into sharp claws and were covered in fine and solid scales. The red and black robe seemed to have fused with his body and disappeared without a trace. She revealed her dragon body, and a tail sprouted from her hip. When she raised her head, she had fully taken on the form of a dragon. Even though everyone was mentally prepared, everyone's eyes were still filled with shock. The Black Dragon was rapidly growing in size. 5 meters, 10 meters, 20 meters. In the blink of an eye, she had grown to more than 30 meters long. When she spread her wings, the wingspan was almost 50 meters wide. The ceiling formed by the lava was at least 300 meters high, but the moment she grew in size, everyone had the illusion that she would trample through the solid rock floor, break through the ceiling that was equivalent to more than 100 stories high, and smash the huge stone pillars supporting the cave. Roar! The mighty dragon roared, causing the surrounding rocks that were not strong enough to fall along with the roar. Many people subconsciously tightened their grip on the weapons in their hands. But in the next moment, the dumbfounded Alliance heroes were amused by Onyxia's equipment. The tailor-made armor on her chest with the emblems of the Alliance and the Marcus family was fine, but the most amusing thing was still the seat at the back of her neck and the long reins. It seemed that Xueqi had treated the dignified Black Dragon Princess as a large griffin. Queen, she walked up and put one hand on Xueqi's shoulder. What a great mount! My dear Xueqi, why don't you give her to me? Before Duke could reply, Onyxia had already let out a roar and spoke in the common tongue. I'll eat you. Xueqi's eyes flashed and he said sternly, What did you say? Onyxia's dragon neck shrank, and she began to use a roundabout strategy. No. I refuse to let anyone other than you ride on my back. Not even your woman. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself and eat her. Queen she did not care, and turned to look at Xueqi, blinking her right eye. Such a disobedient mount. Why don't we kill it? Kill it. Tyrant raised her hand in agreement. Kill it, the girls said in unison. Onyxia was trembling non-stop. Yes, yes, good idea. The dragon head can be placed in the Iron Furnace Castle Adventurers Association. Magni agreed loudly. But as soon as he finished speaking, Gerben knocked him on the back of the head. He turned. Why did you knock me? The dwarf craftsman put his hands on his hips. This is Marcus's family matter. Why are you interrupting? Can't I tease her? No. Gerben said decisively. The results were out. Of course, it was a group of heroines who happily rode on the back of the Black Dragon Princess. Onyxia, who was in a difficult situation, naturally brought nearly 10 female heroes for a ride nearby. It was fortunate that it was her. If it were an ordinary adult dragon, it would not have been large enough for so many people to stand on. After all the trouble, Queen she looked satisfied, but the whisper of the wind almost choked Xueqi to death. All right. Now, let us discuss your sin of not attacking any of our sisters last night. Wait. Something was wrong. Didn't they say that XX and Xueqi are forbidden to enter? Wasn't this godly development no different from beasts are worse than beasts? Or did Queen she find out that I tamed dragons? Xueqi had a toothache. Just then, there was a series of loud rumbles in the distance. Everyone who had been in the molten core was familiar with this sound. It was the footsteps of the molten core giants. But they had never heard such continuous footsteps. Xueqi's eyes narrowed. He flipped and jumped on Onyxia's back. Pippy dragon, let's go. Onyxia's yellow pupils rolled at Xueqi. Then she flapped her wings and flew into the air. After flying for 5 kilometers, the enemy was already in sight. It was an army of giants that covered the sky. Giants that were 20 to 30 meters tall were rubbing shoulders with each other. They did not have a formation, and merely squeezed towards the Alliance's camp like a tide. However, numbers were combat power and destructive power. If this giant army was left alone, it was enough to destroy the entire camp. Chapter 1160. Even Onyxia, who had the body of a demigod, was shocked speechless when she saw such a huge army of molten giants. Not even a dragon roar could be heard. It was a long river formed by tens of thousands of molten giants, and among them were hundreds of large fire elementals, king of flames. This was beyond the limits of what conventional military force could handle. The tank army that Xueqi had painstakingly built up for 20 years was meaningless in the face of such a force. To a dwarf, explosions were an art form. Unfortunately, the cannons that used gunpowder as their main weapon of destruction were useless in front of the molten giants who were natural fire elementals. That's why I hate elementals that cannons can't deal with. Xueqi muttered. At this moment, the fire elementals noticed Onyxia who was flying in the air. In the long line, an even brighter fire dragon ignited. The King of Flames had already raised their 3-fingered fire hands. It was as if there was a silent command that only the fire elementals could receive. Countless fireballs vibrated in unison. The next moment, Xueqi and Onyxia could clearly see a cloud of fire flying into the air, and the dim ceiling of the cave was dyed blood red. The cloud of fire did not stop, and it spewed up like a geyser. Hey hey hey! Bastard master! Do you have any ideas? Although I play with fire, I'm not immune to fire. Onyxia almost peed her pants. This terrain was terrible for dragons. A cave that was hundreds of meters high was a very high height for humans, but for WYRMS, it was just a matter of time before they could climb up. On the surface, the Black Dragon Princess could easily increase the distance by climbing and let the fireballs dissipate in the air. But this was the molten core, where the concentration of fire elementals was extremely high. The distance and power of the fireballs were several times stronger than on the surface. Even if she turned into a human, she would not be able to find a place to hide, and she would still have to take it head-on. She was very resistant to fire, but she was not immune to fire. Blast the rock stratum above us. Xueqi ordered. I don't know how to drill. Onyxia continued to shout. Cut the crap. Xueqi rarely used soul punishment when he was taming her, but he actually used it now. Woohoo! the Black Dragon Princess blasted the ceiling of the cave with her dragon breath. Bang! Countless stones of different sizes flew everywhere and fell to the ground. Xueqi's pupils constricted, and he mumbled as if he was sleep-talking. Wind! Wind! Defong! Suddenly, a gust of wind blew near the top of the cave. This was a space dominated by the Fire Elemental Lord. Casually using the Frost Elemental Lord would only consume mana. With Xueqi's strength alone, he could pull out thousands of Flame Kings to fight against them. That was just asking to die. Xueqi had an even more ingenious method: wind magic, which belonged to the nature element. This was a skill that even Onyxia, who had lived for God knows how many years, was amazed by. Countless stones of different sizes began to assemble at a high speed under the drive of the Wind Elemental Lord. In less than a second, the irregular rock fragments, big or small, no matter how different they were put together into one solid stone hemisphere after another as if they were playing with a jigsaw puzzle. These stone hemispheres were like protective shields that were layered on the outside, blocking the path of the fire cloud. Crack, crack, crack. It was a continuous series of explosions. Onyxia did not know how many layers of the stone hemispheres had been shattered. She only knew that she could feel the heat wave that was spreading and hear the sound of the rock stratum exploding. However, there was still no fireball that hit her body after 3 seconds. Did she pass without any injuries? What are you waiting for? Run! While Onyxia was still in a daze, Duke had already taken out a long whip from his interspatial bag and whipped it on her dragon's buttocks. For her, who had thick skin and flesh in her dragon form and was protected by thick scales, this whip did not feel much at all. However, the experience of being whipped by a 9-tailed whip in her human form made her awake. She turned and rolled her eyes at Xueqi, then flapped her wings and made a beautiful 180-degree turn in the air before turning around and running. The Fire Elemental Lords could not fly. They could only watch the man and dragon leave with their bloodshot eyes. Seeing Xueqi return on the Black Dragon, everyone in the camp heaved a sigh of relief. How's the situation? Mograine was very nervous. Not good. More than 4,000 molten core giants and more than 500 flame kings. It's not a force that we can handle head-on. Xueqi reported the numbers that the system elf had scanned. After purposely making it general, everyone was shocked. The hero team would need more than a minute to kill the molten core giants no matter how fast they were. 4,000 of them. Regardless of whether they attacked together, even if they just stood there and let you kill them, they would still die of exhaustion. Some of the new members of the team, such as Sally Whitemane, were already a little green in the face. Woken suddenly raised his head. If we can't fight them then, Xueqi continued, we can only outsmart them. Grom patted his chest, making a muffled sound like thunder. Tell us, we'll do it. Duke Hydraxis also nodded. Xueqi pointed to the cave in the distance. That was where Xueqi killed Gehennas and Baron Geddon, the 2 leaders. Do you see that? Yes. I need the Water Elemental Legion and the strong people of the Horde, along with Sally Tyrant, and the 5th squad just now to hold this place. Defend to the death? Woken asked. Xueqi shook his head. There's no need. We don't need to race against time before Nefarian makes any real moves. Ragnaros lost 6 of his leader-level subordinates. Even if they have elemental bodies, they can't be resurrected in a few years. Since we destroyed their node once, we can destroy it again. You guys try to hold on. If you can't, retreat through the portal. What about you and the main force of the Alliance? Xueqi raised his right thumb and pointed to a mount behind him. I'll lead the assault team riding the dragon to deal with the leader of the molten core giants, Gurmanj the Incinerator. Hey, we almost became barbecued meat just now. Onyxia protested. Shut up. Mounts have no right to speak. The sad princess could only shut the dragon's mouth bitterly. Aurelia stepped forward. Are you confident? That was just a reconnaissance just now. I was caught off guard by accident. This time. 10 minutes later, Onyxia carried more than 20 people through the previous area again. But this time it was much safer, because Xueqi had created many phantom images of the Black Dragon in advance and rushed to the front. The phantom images that lacked the draconic aura could not deceive the strong people, but it was not difficult to deceive the low-intelligence King of Flames. Looking at the countless fireballs in the air, it was more like watching a fireworks show that had nothing to do with them. Chapter 1161. Seeing Onyxia's powerful and agile figure gradually disappear into the distance, Grom's ambition seemed to be ignited. I don't know why, but I just think of my old friend Zulu Hid. Although the beast men of the Dragonmaw clan had used dishonorable means to control the Red Dragon clan, that was a glorious era when beast men could also become dragon knights and conquer the sky. It wasn't like now, where everyone could feel the withering of the tribe's talents. Most of the older generation of orcs were killed, and the rest were old. Among the new generation of orcs, there were few that Grom looked up to. Only Sal and Wajin were leading the way. Moreover, the professions were very unbalanced. Most of them were melee professions. There were only a few ranged professions, and there were no heroes like human priests who could recover. If the tribe fought with the Alliance, as long as the tribe could not kill the Alliance's recovery professions in the first round, it could basically be declared the tribe's failure. In fact, not only Grom, but Agrima's great chief Sal was also anxious. The Rustwater conglomerate represented by the goblin trade prince Galavix felt that it was completely unprofitable to trade with the Alliance. After the Shameless Alliance attacked the Booty Bay controlled by the goblins chose to side with the tribe, which Sal accepted without hesitation. The goblins only offset the technological advantage that the gnomes brought to the Alliance. This was far from enough. The tribe seriously lacked magic heroes. At this time, a guest that Sal didn't want to see brought a proposal that he couldn't refuse. When he saw the real guest brought by the guest, Sal trembled and his mouth moved for a long time. Finally, he put his right hand on his chest and bowed. That was the tribe's most ancient etiquette. Of course, Grom and the others were still fighting in the molten core and didn't know what was happening far away in Agrima. They had to focus on the battle in front of them. Ha! Roar! The Tauren chief Cain, who had recovered his spirit, continued to use his terrible momentum to fight against Archimonde. He directly rushed towards the molten core giant that was about to punch him. The difference in size was almost 5 times, but it was the molten core giant that was pushed back. The old bull snorted, "Slag giant, your strength is simply unworthy of the giant name." Humph. Grom leaped up high and cleanly slashed the molten core giant's neck with Bloodhowl. If it wasn't a fire elemental creature, this axe alone would have killed it. But it didn't. Even though half of its neck had been chopped off and its head was hanging low, it still swung its arm at Grom, trying to slap him to death. At this moment, a chilling stream of ice rushed into the giant's body, and very craftily entered the giant's body through the wound that Grom had created. The blazing flame heart in the molten core giant's body was instantly extinguished by this cold spring, and the giant suddenly stopped moving. After killing one giant, there would be hundreds and thousands of giants surging over. That kind of continuous pressure, if it was someone with a weak mind, would have easily collapsed. The leader of this group was a peerless expert who had been through a lot. Ha 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 ha. Not enough. Not enough. If you want to punch me, you have to be 10 times stronger. Cain was very excited. In the Battle of Mount Hyjal, he was suppressed by Archimonde, but now the situation was completely reversed. A totem pole, a super heavy weapon, was used by Cain as if it was as light as an embroidery needle. The molten core giant had never seen such a way of fighting. The idiots who thought that Cain was holding a hollow pillar were all dismantled into stone in the next moment. Duke Hydas's body grew at least 10 times larger, and the 8 or 9-story tall molten core giant only reached his waist. Not only him, but a dozen strong Hydasis water elementals also stood up. They were no less tall than the molten core giant, and they stood in a neat formation with hundreds of other water elementals, pouring a storm of wind and rain toward the exit of the cave. Soon, everyone realized the benefits of defending the dangerous place. The molten core giants were too huge. Even if they disintegrated into a pile of high-temperature stones after they died, they still quickly blocked the seemingly wide line of defense of 500 meters. The giants at the back had to foolishly climb over the bodies of their dead companions. Wajin shouted, "Don't block the entrance, just let them squeeze like this." This was a place near the first boss of the molten core. A cave with a slightly lower terrain connected the main area to this side. On both sides of the cave were rivers of lava that were difficult to pass through, but this was only for mortals. As one of the fire elemental creatures, the molten core giants did not matter at all. Blocking the cave would instead cause the giants who had nowhere to go to take a detour, causing more pressure on the line of defense. Wajin simply set up a pocket formation, or rather, a crane wing formation, while stalling for time to kill the opponent. The situation became tense with the introduction of an elite molten core destroyer into the battlefield. This guy's strength was beyond everyone's expectations, and even Cain had to show some real skills. The two behemoths fought on the blazing ground, turning the sky and earth upside down. If this was a street fight, it was estimated that most of the city would be destroyed in an instant, and several blocks would wail in the flames of destruction. The hard rock ground collapsed inch by inch. Every step of the giant produced blazing flames. Even the fire had a tendency to spread further with the wind. "You want to kill me? You're not strong enough." Cain roared. A tauren and a giant, their fierce battle made the ground solid. The ground was like broken waves stacked layer by layer, and there were shocking cracks full of flames everywhere. It was like an active volcano just happened to erupt under their feet. On the other side, Onyxia kept complaining, and the heroes could not help but smile bitterly. "Be grateful to be on my dragon's back. If it wasn't for the guidance of fate, you would never have this honor in your lifetime. I'm telling you, don't move, or I won't be responsible if you fall." Xueqi held his forehead. He did not understand why a female black dragon who was born to play tricks would become like this after becoming a mount. Was this arrogance? Or some kind of distortion? Xueqi did not know, but this might be a good thing. Xueqi sat on the dragon's back on the dragon's saddle, which was theoretically the dragon's throne. The system kept scanning, and finally, a huge, red outline of a human figure. The next moment, more red outline monsters entered Xueqi's vision. Even seeing the three red names, Xueqi still had a confident expression on his face. "Found you." Chapter 1162. Hey! Mount, northwest by west. Fly straight. Xueqi's words shut Onyxia up. The Black Dragon Princess didn't say anything else and turned to fly. Perhaps it was a tacit understanding from taming dragons. Xueqi would call her name when he was happy, but when he called her Mount, it meant that Xueqi was unhappy. If Xueqi dared to mess around when he was unhappy, he would suffer. Onyxia could ignore anyone else's words, but she had to listen to Xueqi's. Seeing the smug black dragon almost tucking its tail between its legs, the other experts of the alliance were all snickering. "Hee hee. My axe is already thirsty for more." Magni held an axe in one hand and a hammer in the other. He struck a pose that he thought was very cool, but he almost fell because of a certain dragon's sudden descent. If he wasn't tied up with ropes, Magni Bronzebeard would have been the first dwarf king to fall to his death in the tens of thousands of years of history. After pulling the cursing Magni up, everyone turned to look at Xueqi. Facing the burning gazes, Xueqi felt a sense of heroism. The familiar faces overlapped with the epic stories in his mind. At this point in time, they might have died in the original history, or they might have been wronged and wasted their time in the countryside, or they might have fallen helplessly to become the undead and slaves of fate. There were noble kings and queens among them, as well as lowly bandit leaders. There were the most noble saints, as well as the most depraved villains. Now, because of Xueqi's stirring of fate, they were all gathered under the same flag, under Xueqi's command. Not only them, but the forces they had were also Xueqi's chess pieces. At this moment, Xueqi felt like he was the king of the world. He could cut off the flow with a flick of his whip. Even the sea could evaporate. Even the mountains could be filled up. Xueqi. A once lowly transmigrator now. None. No. Yes. The flame of passion was rolling in Xueqi's blood, and the excitement factor spread to every corner of his body. Mograine said sternly, "Commander, please give me your orders." The group of high-ranking experts spoke in unison. "Please give the order, Xueqi. He would not pass on this responsibility. I can basically control the fire demon guards. Mages, turn the guy I marked with an arcane spell into a sheep." Jaina asked in surprise, "Sheep transformation? That's a spell that can only be used on beings with low intelligence." Xueqi rolled his eyes at her and smiled without saying a word. Xueqi was clearly saying, "Is it my fault that those guys are retarded?" Jaina laughed, and then immediately became serious again. After using polymorph 3 times, the arcana technique's power will weaken. I suggest that you use other types of magic. Then come again. Xueqi paused. Jaina, Star, Elusia, Flatbread, Ronin, Diamond, and I, Triangle. I'll use polymorph to control one, and help kill Aurelia. Mark the monster with Hunter's Mark. Duque raised his hand, and marks made of arcana energy appeared on his palm. Yellow stars, orange discs, purple diamonds. Understood. The three mages said in unison. Aurelia, mark the biggest one with Hunter's mark. Leave it to me. The mature female ranger's eyes lit up. Tyrion, control the two dogs. Don't kill them. Okay. Magni, you'll carry number 1 to number 3. Gavin Rad, number 4 to number 6. Sidan, number 7 and number 8. Understood. The three answered in unison. The rest of you, fire with all your might. Kill the biggest one, Gurmanj the incinerator, then kill number 1 to number 8. Kill the saffron pioneer. Yes. The others answered in unison. At this moment, Onyxia suddenly turned her long dragon neck. Then what about me? How can someone as powerful as me not have an important mission? Duque smiled. It seemed that after biting the back of her neck last night, she had really adapted to her new identity. She was undoubtedly an extremely proud dragon. Even if she was reduced to being a mount, she still could not let go of her pride. Blindly suppressing her was not a good thing. If he were to ride a dejected empty shell with the appearance of a giant dragon, even Duke himself would feel that it was meaningless. All right. I'll mark you with a black dragon's mark later. I'll leave the most important one, Major Domo Executus, to you. He's the leader of the entire Molten Core, second only to Ragnaros. He's the culprit who commanded a large number of monsters to attack our water elemental node. The most important one. Onyxia's yellow eyes lit up when she heard this. Even though she knew that Duque was probably bluffing, the Black Dragon Princess still wanted to save face. Anyway, it sounded like the most important enemy leader was left to him. He's the key to us fighting against Ragnaros. You can beat him half to death, but you can't kill him. Before we deal with the other guys, you can play with him. Hee hee. Leave it to me. Onyxia was drooling. Torturing the enemy is my favorite. On the other side, Major Domo was on the verge of breaking down. He had long realized that Duque and the others had come with ill intentions. Unfortunately, he had underestimated the combat power of Duque's group. Moreover, because Duque had killed the first few leaders too quickly, even though it looked like they were swarming together, they were still being defeated one by one. In particular, the deaths of the Molten Hound King, Magmadar, and Garland were a huge blow to the Molten Core. With the death of the Hound King, all the wandering Molten Hounds were automatically killed. As the leader of the Earth Elementals here, Garland was dead, which also meant that all the Earth Elemental monsters would not be resurrected. In the end, when he wanted to gather an army, he could only control the Molten Giants and the Fire Elementals. A moment ago, he did not think that the enemy would be able to pass through thousands of giants and fire elementals. Even the Air Force would not be able to do it. That was until he saw Onyxia soaring nimbly over the top of the cave. At this moment, he really looked like he had eaten such *T. Why? Did Nefarian lie to me? He claimed to be against mortals, but he sent his sister to join them. Or is there another reason? No matter what the reason was, the enemy had come, and they wanted to execute the plan to kill them. There was no doubt about it. Gyurmang. Saffron. The enemy's elites are all here, let our army come back. His idea was good. He wanted to let the main army turn back and annihilate the enemy elites here. But in a moment of desperation, he forgot how smart his subordinates were. A moment ago, the giants had received news that they were going to attack. Suddenly, they were told to retreat, which directly caused chaos at the front line. Grom and the others were pleasantly surprised to find that the enemy was in a mess. Chapter 1163. Not to mention the Molten Core giants. Even in the European world before Duque traveled to, there were often spectacular scenes of a fully armored knight chasing hundreds of farmers. It wasn't that the commander didn't want the farmers to gather and teach the knight a lesson. It was just that commanding a group of illiterate and ignorant cowards was a very tragic and painful thing to do. If the Molten Core giants were still lining up and trying to break through the narrow cave in an orderly manner, it would be a complete joke now. They collided with each other, and their stone bodies flowed with lava in the cave. Dazzling sparks and continuous sounds of rocks colliding could be heard. Some of the giants continued to charge forward without a care, while others began to turn around and tried to retreat from the not-so-spacious cave. It was a complete mess. The molten core giants had strong bodies, but since God gave them strength, it also took away their agility. Of course, Major Domo didn't have time to care about this, because he saw a huge palm. It was a unique palm technique that descended from the heavens. Jumping high from Onyxia's body, with the recoil from the arcane impact, Xueqi plummeted to the ground like a cannonball. He put his hands together and looked pious. The hundreds of magic circuits in his body, large and small, circulated and generated magic to the extreme in one breath. In the next instant, Xueqi exhaled and spoke with an imposing manner. Get out of my way. In any boss-level battle, how to start the fight was a very rigorous study. If you didn't start the fight well, it wouldn't be surprising for the whole team to be wiped out. Mograine had suggested letting him go first. After all, he had invincibility. Xueqi shook his head and refused. They didn't know how chaotic the situation would be when the three bosses were added together. Duke knew that the seventh boss, Saffron, had 4 minions. The eighth boss, Gyurmang, had 2 molten hounds that wouldn't die together with the King of Hounds. The ninth boss, Major Domo, was the most ridiculous. He had 8 minions, 4 of which were mages and 4 of which were melee fighters. The minions of the 3 bosses were not ordinary elite monsters. Strictly speaking, they were rare elite monsters that were difficult to deal with. With so many minions gathered together, the 3 bosses would be able to unleash their skills. It would be too easy for the team to be wiped out. Xueqi could be resurrected, but once his team was destroyed, it would be impossible to assemble another hero team of similar standards. Xueqi wasn't willing to gamble. Therefore, he directly went up himself. This palm strike of Xueqi's perfectly imitated the stance of the Buddha's palm. Of course, this had nothing to do with Buddhism, Taoism, or martial arts. This was an attack condensed purely from the purest arcane magic. It looked like it was put together, but it was actually extremely violent. The 3 leaders and their guards raised their heads high. Each of them felt an inexplicable throbbing in their hearts. They first stared at Xueqi, who was descending from the sky, and then looked around one after another. Because the surrounding environment seemed to have suddenly become unfamiliar. This was the molten core, a blazing hell. Everything here was related to fire and heat. In the past hundreds of years, there was not a single existence that was unrelated to fire. The magma was forever boiling. After a little cooling, new ground was formed. Then, new magma overflowed and continued to change the geographical environment here. Whether it was the ceiling of the cave that was hundreds of meters high or the solid rock stratum beneath their feet, this place was constantly changing. But what came into view now seemed to be a still world. The fierce wind that emitted the smell of sulfur seemed to be frozen. Every piece of black stone lay there quietly. There was neither the sound of the wind nor the roar of any living beings. In the distance, the blazing light of the magma that was like the sun passed through the purple-blue barrier formed by Xueqi's spreading arcane energy. It seemed strange. It was terrifyingly quiet. It was as if everything in the world had suddenly fallen from extreme motion into extreme silence. The blazing world seemed to have cooled down. It wasn't voluntary, but it was being oppressed by an even more powerful force, forcing them to crawl silently even if they were unwilling. At that moment, all the fire elemental creatures felt that the familiar fire elementals were retreating, leaving them in fear. An even more powerful force began to descend with Xueqi's fall. That was the power of arcane magic. It used an irresistible force to push away the surrounding fire elementals, and was dominating the elemental activity within a radius of hundreds of meters. No, it was like rewriting the laws of space and forcefully taking over everything. This is impossible. Executus yelled. Today, I will make the impossible possible. With Xueqi's angry roar, a huge magic palm the size of a football field slammed down. Other than the largest and most burly incinerator, Gyurigman, almost every fire demon subconsciously covered their heads. But in the next moment, they subconsciously opened their eyes and found that their bodies, which were not light, were scattered by the powerful impact. They couldn't control themselves. Even the heaviest molten hound beside Gyurigman flew more than 10 meters away and then spun strangely on the ground under the powerful impact. The lighter fire demon elites trembled. Their bodies were the lightest as they flew into the sky and landed heavily on the ground. Every Alliance powerhouse's heart was on fire. Because what they saw was a completely different scene. Xueqi's slap was like the start of a billiard game, smashing the opponent's strict formation into pieces. Originally, this was a sunken cave. Anyone who wanted to enter must first pass through the lava giant leader Gurligman, who was guarding the cave entrance, and waste time with his super meat shield. Because of Onyxia's existence, the Alliance commandos were able to directly go over Gurigman's head and attack the opponent's weak fire demon group. Duque's aggro this time was even more ingenious. Because the focus of Duque's magic attack was not to kill the opponent, but to create impact. The moment the compressed arcane energy exploded, all the guards around the three bosses were blown away. Not only that, but at the same time as the explosion, Duque used arcane energy to condense pre-agreed marks on each of the guards. Squares, triangles, pancakes, numbers from 1 to 8. When Onyxia had only beautifully turned half a circle on the battlefield, the Alliance powerhouses had already jumped down from more than 10 meters in the air and found their targets. Bah! 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 In the blink of an eye, the 4 guards turned into silly lambs and rolled around on the ground. Chapter 1164. Gather! Assemble! Majesty, 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 Executus shouted in panic. It was not his fault for losing his composure. He had never been a courageous person. He had good management skills, but he lacked the courage to make up his mind. He also did not have the strength to fight against 1,000 men. In the fire elemental world where strength was everything, this meant that he could only be the second brother. He could never be the leader. The fire demon was born with a weak physique. Coupled with the fact that he was used to being bossed around, he had long forgotten about fighting. However, he did not have a single guard around him. Instead, he was greeted by a gigantic black dragon. The black dragon's ruthless and evil face revealed a human-like smile. Haha! Go on and shout. No one will come to save you even if you scream your lungs out. Onyxia subconsciously called out the words that Duque had said to her the most at night when he was taming the dragon. However, it was quite fitting, wasn't it? Major Domo was dumbfounded. His face immediately darkened. Onyxia! You are violating the covenant that the King of the Black Dragons, Nefarian, made with us. The King of the Black Dragons will not let you go. Onyxia laughed shamelessly. I don't want to say it, but I really don't mind my beloved brother's head being cut off by my master and hung at the gates of Stormwind City. You. Major Domo was about to explode from anger. The black dragon's huge body approached. Yo, little fire demon, you and I are the only ones left here. Pass. 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 Major Domo trembled. Ha! Teleport. As a manager, Major Domo naturally had all sorts of life-saving skills. For example, he could teleport his enemies into the lava to take a bath. Unfortunately, this trick did not work. The magic resistance of a demigod giant dragon was ridiculously high, not to mention the amount of magic power required and the difficulty of teleporting such a huge existence. The problem was that Major Domo did not have any special attack skills. Ragnaros will protect me and not let me get hurt, he shouted. Suddenly, a huge and thick magic shield enveloped his entire body. The shield brimming with demigod magic aura was obviously able to absorb a lot of damage. Damage? Who said anything about hurting you? A teasing smile appeared on the Black Dragon Princess' face. My master wants me to play with you. With that, the Black Dragon stretched out its huge claws and picked up the 5-meter-tall Major Domo. To be fair, this guy was quite heavy, but in front of the Black Dragon Princess, who had an even more exaggerated body size, he was just a ball. Ragnaros' power did make him immune to all kinds of physical and magical damage, but it didn't fix him to the ground. As a result, Onyxia grabbed him together with the magic shield, tossed him into the sky, and caught him again. Toss it up and catch it. Just like the moral integrity of a certain due person who keeps throwing away and picking it back up. On the other side, Varian, who already had the experience of fighting the ghost wolf Rogosh, directly faced the incinerator Gurmanger's attack with his dual-wielding berserker stance. There were many others who were stronger than William. There were many who were more agile than Varian. However, there were very few people like Varian who could combine strength and agility so perfectly. When he dodged, he was like a light and cunning wolf, easily using his agility to avoid Gurmanger's heavy punches. The moment he switched from dodging to attacking, he suddenly became the most violent wolf king. Using the divine artifact dual swords that were like his own claws, he crazily slashed at the joints of Gurmanger's arms and legs. The hard rock limbs that mortal weapons couldn't damage turned into flying rocks under the continuous slashes of the divine artifact dual swords. Arg, Gjormanger was infuriated, and he chased after Varian crazily, completely ignoring the fact that there were actually other powerful mortals behind him, such as the Van Cleef father and daughter, and Valera, who were secretly and effectively destroying his limbs. Unfortunately, Varian's moment of glory only lasted for a few dozen seconds. Soon, Gjormanger's attention was attracted by another person. In order to kill Gjormanger as soon as possible, Mograine desperately slashed with Ashbringer, easily attracting the Molten Core Giant's attention. Divine artifacts were also divided into different levels. Ashbringer was a high-level divine artifact, and its power was obviously above Varian's, Shadow Ripper, and Shadow Plunderer. Duque glanced at it and snickered. According to the game's terminology, it was OT, which meant that the boss's aggro was out of control. Usually, if the boss attacked and chased after people randomly, the whole team would not be far from being wiped out. However, the people here were all famous and powerful people. As long as they were given enough time, they would even dare to kill the boss by themselves. In the face of Gjormanger's heavy punches and the water tank-sized flame blast attack, Mograine wasn't alarmed. Instead, he was delighted. He directly swung Ashbringer, which was the size of a door, and put on a good show of cutting the fireball in half with a giant holy light sword. Seeing that his senior was so fierce, Varian bared his fangs, which was rare for him. On the right side of the battlefield, Duque was fighting with Saffron, the Forerunner. In the first exchange, Saffron directly stabbed out a swift and violent black light in the void. Duque's figure moved, and with a sidestep, he seemed to have dodged the spear thrown by his opponent by a hair's breadth. The half-black spear with a dull color brushed past less than 5 centimeters from Duque's cheek, and the strong wind it brought made Duque's cheek hurt. No matter what, he still managed to dodge it. The Forerunner Saffron was very surprised. In his eyes, mortal mages were all-powerful in magic, but lacked in agility. He didn't find it strange that Duque could use any kind of magic to block his spear. He found it strange that Duque dodged it with simple combat moves. At this moment, Duque's heart entered a very mysterious state. He was clearly holding a staff in his left hand, a sword in his right, and wearing a robe that was so long that it almost touched the ground. He looked like a nondescript swordsman in plain clothes, but his movements were abnormally agile under the effect of the haste spell. The divine sword, Gandalf, in his hand glowed with a dim glow. That was only on the surface. If possible, Duque could strike with his sword at any time with all his strength. Right now, it was only because Duque had restrained almost all the converted mana on the sword that it didn't have much effect on the surrounding environment. In a battle below the Breaking Dawn level, there would often be a turbulent flow of elemental elements as soon as the two sides made a move. If one was not careful, the overflowing shockwaves would cause nothing to grow within dozens of meters. After reaching the Breaking Dawn level, the battle became more low-key and reserved, and also more dangerous. The degree of control over mana determined the amount and purity of the mana that could be compressed. It was too easy for a magic sword made of high-purity mana to break the opponent's magic shield. Chapter 1165. Duque defended more than he attacked, because he needed to recover. In order to successfully open up the situation, he almost poured out all his magic power in one go. Even with the speed of a third-class Breaking Dawn mage's magic recovery, it would take a long time. Of course, if Duque could find an opportunity to use the arcane magic recovery spell Awaken, without getting injured, then it would be a different matter. However, before that, Duque had to give Pioneer Sapron enough pressure. Swoosh! A long continuous sound of wind breaking rang out under Pioneer Sapron's armpit. Then, the seventh brother of the Molten Core felt the pain from that part of his body. The wound wasn't big, but it went straight through one of his 2 lungs on his left rib, and the flame aura that used to fill his lungs leaked out at a high speed. Roar! He was furious. A huge flaming hand suddenly exploded around him, engulfing everything around him. The earth cracked, and the solid rock layers exploded into the air in large chunks, turning into smaller rocks, and then turning into powder and dissipating in the air. Unfortunately, he missed. Duque wasn't nearby at all, and even the one holding the dry tofu sword wasn't his main body. Almost at the same time that he let his mirror clone take his sword to work, he directly cast invisibility and ran to the long-range team. The 3 Windrunner sisters looked at Duque, who had slipped here, and stared at each other. How can a weak boy like me go and fight with the enemy's monster leader like an uncouth old man? Dumoke confidently said shamelessly. If they hadn't witnessed Duque beating up Nesario and risking his life to destroy Archimond, anyone would think that Duque was a coward. Queen Sylvia rolled her eyes at Duque. Aurelia, however, said, "Protect Duque." It had nothing to do with life or death, but it was about the recovery of magic power. The Awaken spell that Duque cast used a special method to stimulate the slightly overloaded magic circuit to return to its original position, filling it with a large amount of magic power. This was on the premise that Duque couldn't move, not even a finger, in the state of awakening. Once the casting posture was interrupted prematurely, the loss of magic power for every second of delay in awakening was equivalent to a radiant moon mage casting 1,000 top-notch fireballs. The three sisters, who were connected, stood in a standard equilateral triangle, firmly protecting Duque in the middle. The 10 seconds of awakening seemed short, but it was also very long. When Duque put down his raised hands, the three sisters secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Aurelia glanced at Pioneer Saffron, who was still foolishly playing hide-and-seek with Duque's mirror clone in the distance, and suddenly sighed. Duque was clearly a mage, but he played like a thief. It was precisely because he was stabbed so hard just now that fellow mistakenly thought that Duque was born for sneak attacks. Just now, when Duque's magic power was all used up, this fellow didn't seize the opportunity to counterattack, and now it has no hope. The main force of the heroes were attacking Gyurmanger the Incinerator, and the other warriors and knights who were carrying elite guards did not fall behind. With a glance, Duque knew that everyone was carrying the monsters in name, but in fact, they were all secretly killing the monsters. If you, Duque, can carry a boss on your own, then I can kill 1 or 2 rare elites, right? Relying on the long duration of his deity's descent talent, seeing that everyone was almost done fighting, Magni decided to transform. His mountain-like body made of silver metal gave the 3 guards opposite him a fright. It was already too late when they wanted to run. Bam! With a loud sound, Magni directly smashed his hammer on the ground and activated Thunderstrike. The powerful electric currents instantly numbed the bodies of the 3 elite guards. Magni strode forward with his short legs, which were still short even after his enlarged body, and made a beautiful leap, throwing out his Tempest Warhammer in midair. This was the real Azeroth, not that digitalized game. Perhaps non-human creatures had unimaginably tenacious vitality, but as long as their vitals were hit, they would still be heavily injured or even die. After Magni became bigger, the Storm Warhammer that he threw out was also a size bigger. The hammer, which contained the power of heavenly lightning, directly smashed the head of a guard into a rotten watermelon. With a backhand swing, Magni directly chopped off the neck of the guard with the arcane number 2 above his head. Apart from Magni, Gavinrad and the rest of them also had achievements. Of course, the greatest achievement was still in Duque's hands. The strength of fire demon leaders was based on their seemingly endless skills and spells. For those who were fighting for the first time, every fire demon leader represented the unknown and danger. For Duque, Pioneer Saffron was very familiar with everything. As long as he didn't transcend his fate and create skills that only belonged to him and were unknown to outsiders, he had no secrets from Duque. Dozens of hands of magic floated in midair and rained arcane bullets non-stop. Duque and his dozen illusions ran around Saffron and left all kinds of wounds on the fire demon leader. The new wounds were then exploited by the hands of magic controlled by the system, which deliberately attacked the new wounds to expand their achievements. Throw. Dodged. Roaring Flame Spear. Dodged. Hand of Ragnaros. Duque couldn't do anything about it, but why don't you use your ultimate skills consecutively? In the past 25,000 years, the leaders of the Molten Core, who barely had any battle experience after the War of Domination, mostly only had a few tricks up their sleeves and lacked the ability to adapt. After the veterans of the heroes figured out the pattern, they didn't need Duque's command at all. They kept attacking the enemy with their own understanding and judgment of the battle. Almost at the same time, Gyurmang the Incinerator and Pioneer Saffron fell. Manager Majordomo Executus almost pissed his pants when he saw the 2 leaders whom he was most proud of kneeling on the ground. Their 3 elite guards also followed in the footsteps of the 2 leaders after the heroes shifted their firepower. They were all wiped out in a short span of 20 seconds. He had already lost his temper after being tortured by Onyxia. Timid as he was, he shouted on the spot, "Don't! Don't kill me. I surrender. Surrender. The experts who had been sharpening their weapons and preparing to add another record to their accomplishments were all stunned. Everybody knew that Xueqi never intended to kill this guy, but this guy was too spineless. Gavin Rad whistled. Yo! Boss, now that you have the Black Dragon Princess as your mount, you want a fire demon leader to be your butler? I don't dare to wander around your house anymore. Xueqi smiled and didn't say anything. Chapter 1166. Xueqi waved his hand, and the other teams immediately went to work according to the plan. As the leader of the Molten Giants, the death of Gjurmanger the Incinerator only meant that there were no new Molten Giants in the Molten Core, but the existing giants would not automatically die. This was a little different from the Molten Hound King's mechanism. Xueqi did not know why. It seemed that after torturing Majordomo Executus, Onyxia's depression had been greatly alleviated. Xueqi had not even used his nine-tailed whip. He only said a few words to her, and she happily brought the main force back. Only a standard team was left here. Xueqi, Gavin Rad, Kalia, Sasha, and Edwin Van Cleef. Majordomo did not dare to move. If Xueqi was not here, he might have some other ideas. But since Xueqi, who had just single-handedly killed Saffron's forerunner, was here, he would not dare to move even if he had 10 more guts. I'll listen to you. Don't kill me. Majordomo lowered his body as much as possible, curling his long tail together as he raised his hands. He even raised his scales, making his body look even more unprotected. Edwin, the boss who should have been eliminated in the death mines in history, had been the eyes and ears of the Marcus family for the past 20 years. He was jokingly called Xueqi's most loyal dog. He slowly approached Xueqi. Eyes flicker. Beware of tricks. Edwin, I know what his trump card is. I've seen everything in the River of Time. Edwin breathed a sigh of relief. There was nothing more awesome than a prophet coming to cheat. He hid his body, but Xueqi could clearly see through the system's mark that Edwin was very responsible for keeping his guard up. He sneaked behind the manager, and if Majordomo dared to attack, he would stab the manager's heart. Xueqi said, Hey, I'm not afraid to tell you that besides the mainstream races like elves, dwarves, and gnomes, my subordinates are all elves and dwarves. Nagas, murlocs, and other creatures have served me for over 20 years. Recently, I even took in the Black Dragon Princess Onyxia as my mount. If you sincerely serve me, I don't mind having a fire demon butler. What I'm afraid of is that you still want to lure us to the core of the Molten Core and suddenly lure Ragnaros out to destroy us. The last sentence was said very slowly, but it was full of pressure. Xueqi had revealed Majordomo's final plan, scaring him out of his wits. He kowtowed again and again. All right. I have no interest in your life. Take me to the treasure you hid in the mountains. I know you have a cute box. Executus was drenched in cold sweat. He had no idea how this human knew about the treasure chest he had hidden in his nest. He had secretly brought it out of the fire elemental realm. For hundreds of years, he had not let anyone else know about it except himself. Moreover, the word mountains pointed out the crux of the matter, telling him not to try any tricks. If he wanted to save his life, the only chance was to summon his big boss, Ragnaros. But Lager was not on the mountains. Seeing how Duke managed to scare the other party into a daze with just a few words, Sasha was also giggling secretly. Just as Xueqi and his party controlled Executus, the battle on the other side was coming to an end. The Allied army spent more than a day to clean up the Molten Core giants and the King of Flames that had attacked the water elemental base. Everyone was exhausted, tired. But it was worth it. Every hero had a smile on their faces. Even the powerhouses of the tribe had temporarily forgotten about the failure of Blackwing's nest and enjoyed the joy of victory. Using wooden wine cups the size of small barrels, they drank the strong liquor that was specially transported from the Iron Stove Castle and laughed heartily. Perhaps, only when there was a comparison would one know the difference. Following Xueqi was a series of victories, and fighting alone was extremely difficult. If it was not for the unforgettable hatred between the Alliance and the Horde, it might have led to deeper cooperation, and it was not impossible for the Horde to join the Alliance. What a pity! Woken sighed. Since Executus was under control, the locations of all the fire runes were clearly marked. There were still many fire elemental monsters blocking the way. In order to save time, Duque let Onyxia carry 2 teams of powerhouses and Duke Hydraxis to extinguish the fire. Since they had practiced many times beforehand, and with Duque, the master of dispatch, everything seemed so orderly. First, all the fire runes were destroyed to prevent future trouble. Then, the heroes advanced, and the elites of the water elemental team followed to clean up the remnants and maintain the safety of the supply line. Finally, the dwarves and gnomes engineering team continued to drive over. During this period, Duke had been squeezing Majordomo's dry goods. How much power has Ragnaros recovered? How much power did he put into this clone? What's the geological condition around the fire runes? The system genie scanned Executus at a frequency of 100 times per second, recording data such as the size of his pupils, heartbeat, and breathing. Duque had never used a lie detector before. He purely used the general principle of the lie detector, and let the system genie simulate a lie detector program. Then, regardless of the consequences, as long as the system indicated that Executus' credibility was less than 80%, Duque would switch to the Shadow Priest and use Mind Lash or Mind Blast to teach him how to be a qualified captive. Because Duque set the standard too high, Executus was basically unlucky, and there were many cases of wrongdoing. Duque did not care. According to the original history, Executus was a traitor. On the surface, he surrendered to the players, but in reality, he summoned Ragnaros and hoped that his master would take care of the players. However, his master was also a hot-tempered person. Before he took care of the players, he first took care of Executus. The famous hand of Sovras, the Balrog Ragnaros, smashed down with his hammer. Executus, the 9th boss of the Molten Core, who had been managing the Molten Core for Ragnaros for hundreds of years, was completely reduced to ashes, be it in body or soul. Especially when this guy dared to play tricks and give Duque a fake treasure chest. Duque immediately turned around and ordered, "Onyxia, eat his tail." No. I've confessed, I still have a small treasure chest. Wait, I've already confessed, Chapter 1167. After offering the back of her neck and being bitten by Duque, Onyxia was very tame. She even opened up her spiritual world and let Duque search it. Duque even found some traces of En-Zoth. After all, En-Zotha's spiritual power had been here once. Duque would not believe that he did not leave anything behind. After Duque used the system elf to scan Onyxia's memories, he did not destroy them. A naive black dragon did not suit Duque's interests. He only did something similar to reformatting a computer's hard drive to an unknown area outside of Onyxia's memories. This brought Onyxia some pain, but she quickly accepted the fact. This was because Duque told her that this was a mark he had left on her soul. Now, Duque was not worried that Onyxia would turn the tables. Instead, he was worried that she would become a mount. It was necessary to retain some of her fierceness. Onyxia bit off Majordomo's tail and swallowed it in front of him. That was the best way for Duque to intimidate him. Drip! Drip! Bright red blood splattered from the crisscrossing dragon teeth and dripped onto the ground. Majordomo was so scared that he peed his pants. "No! I was wrong! I was wrong! Don't kill me!" he begged incessantly. Under the watchful eyes of Duque and the other heroes, he finally took out his real treasure. When everyone saw the strong natural and holy auras coming from the box, everyone's eyes were locked on it. Apart from a certain captive who had spent a lot of money on his treasure but had no status. Sasha could not control herself. She picked up a leaf that was emitting an intoxicating green aura. Sasha could clearly feel the leaf's attraction to her. It even seemed to be guiding her somewhere to do something. She let go of the leaf in shock. Something with spiritual power and even self-awareness was not ordinary. Is there a problem? Aurelia was very nervous. She almost pulled out the dagger at her waist and placed it on Majordomo's neck. Before the bitter Majordomo could defend himself, Duke had already concluded the matter. Duque smiled. "No. It's fine. It's an extremely rare treasure, the leaf of the ancient era. Good items can be said to be the best proof of self-worth that hunters and rangers can obtain in this era." "Is it a bow?" Aurelia asked. Big Sis and Third Sis first. Queen Sylvanas said immediately. Duke understood what Queen Sylvanas meant, but he could only smile bitterly. First of all, there are exactly 4 leaves of the ancient era here. And if I remember correctly, at the very end, the longbow you will get will not be as good as the one you have now. So, this is more of a form of training. If that's the case. Sylvanas was a little disappointed. In the beginning, Aurelia and Sasha had followed Duque. They had gotten the Sun Fury longbow of the Phoenix in Karazhan, and Queen Sylvanas had envied them for a long time. However, after Queen Sylvanas, Lilith, and Tyrant had gotten 3 higher-quality light-strike bows from Archimonde, Aurelia and Sasha's equipment had fallen behind. The 4 Windrunner sisters were not disappointed for long. At this stage, other than equipment, their skills had almost reached the peak. In order to step into the demigod realm, they obviously needed more training, improvement, and even miraculous encounters. The 4 sisters were very happy to receive the leaf of the ancient era. Another thing that made Duque happy was the 4 holy eyes. As long as he could get the corresponding shadow eyes, he would be able to get the only proof of being an awesome priest in this era, blessing. It wasn't accurate to call it blessings, because after completing the epic quest that was triggered by the holy eye, the weapon obtained was a divine priest item that could freely switch between the holy blessings and the shadow curse forms. In the future, any priest who did not have a blessing or curse would be seen as unqualified by the elders who had experienced the molten core. Thinking back to before Duque had transmigrated, he had been forced by his team leader to create a Smurf priest account to make it easier for him to find a job. That was how he became the chief priest of the team and even the guild. Ahem. Perhaps this was why Duque was so skilled at taking on the role of a priest. Of course, Duque, with his awesome equipment, could not use blessing, but the new members, Kalia and Sally, needed it. Before returning from the ancient war, Duque had never thought that these two would join the hero team. He did not reserve any equipment for them either. Now, the molten core was definitely the best of the best for the newbies. Kalia had changed from the lowest epic level staff, Jordan's staff, to blessing. Sally Whitemane had changed from a completely mediocre excellent level staff, Staff of Justice, to blessing. Sally was so excited that she wanted to run up and give Duque a kiss when she saw the projection of blessing from Duque's memory. Basically, the newbies had gained a lot after defeating the 9 bosses in the molten core. Didn't they see that William and the other 2, who were previously extremely poor, were now glowing with purple light? Even Gina Goldsword, who was theoretically almost Jaina's stepmother, had gotten a one-handed magic sword, Song of the Azure Sky, that countless mages had fought for before Duque transmigrated to this world. It couldn't be helped. Those who had spent Mount Hyjal with Duque had long surpassed this batch of newbies in terms of equipment. Since the older members did not want it, the newbies could only benefit from it. Of course, there were also some dramatic scenes. Valilla Sagunnar, who had also lived a hard life with William for a long time, ran to Vanessa after getting Executus, Molten Fang's, dagger. She compared her dagger with Vanessa's, and as expected, Valilla burst into tears. Sigh. It was infuriating to compare oneself with others. Why did you have to compare yourself with Vanessa, the maid who had followed Duque for the longest time, the one who was actually a hatchet man and a roasting robot? Duque shook his head and said in his heart, "Girl, you're asking for it." Unexpectedly, Duque did not choose to immediately gather all the heroes to attack Ragnaros. Instead, he slowed down his attacks. On one hand, he would organize armed parades in front of Blackwing's nest from time to time. On the other hand, he even had time to let the kings and dignitaries take turns to rest and rush back to the country to deal with government affairs. Just like that, it was September 21st of the Dark Portal. Chapter 1168. The former prince of the Black Dragons and current king of the Black Dragons, Nefarian, was no fool. He was puzzled and uneasy by Duque's display of power. The Alliance's hero group had slowed down their attacks and even had the time to parade in front of Blackwing's lair. This was a warning to him. Of course, he knew what kind of people the Black Hand brothers were. If they dared to leave Blackrock Mountain when the Alliance's strongest forces were free, they would be courting death. In addition, the Molten Core's fire elemental monsters had all been withdrawn. Nefarian had no choice but to order the Blackrock Beast men to retreat. There was something else that almost drove Nefarian crazy. The princess of the Black Dragons, Onyxia, actually surrendered after being defeated, and willingly became the human magician Duke Marcus's mount. At first, Nefarian thought that it was a smokescreen released by the humans. Later, when Nefarian's shadow clone went to the front lines to supervise the retreat, He coincidentally saw Onyxia running over to launch an air attack on the retreating Blackrock beast men. Nefarian then realized that his sister had really fallen. Onyxia! You're crazy! You actually became a lackey of the humans? Nefarian's illusion roared at the familiar figure in the sky. To be honest, Onyxia did not want to face her brother like this. This scene was like a certain island girl pretending to be an obedient girl in the day, and at night she ran into her brother at the bar. Just imagining the drama and *T would make one want to die of embarrassment. At that moment, Onyxia's 10-meter-long dragon body visibly twitched. The originally agile snake-like dragon neck was like some kind of rusty machine, unable to turn for a long time. For a few seconds, Onyxia wanted to just walk away and escape from reality. In the end, she managed to stop herself. She flapped her huge black wings that were almost fully healed and hovered not far above Nefarian's illusion. Yo! My dear brother, are you trying to say that I'm a disgrace to the dragon race? Alright, since Alexstrasza was once captured and tortured by the beast men, I want to say that I'm not the most shameful one. Onyxia's lack of ambition almost made Nefarian faint from anger. Where's your ambition? Where is your pride? Where's your dignity as a dragon? Nefarian roared at the sky. She seemed to shrug her shoulders, but she didn't. Sorry. My eldest brother. How insignificant were these things in front of the power of destiny? When you have the chance to face Xueqi, you will know that you are actually fighting against the god of fate. You! Nefarian was at a loss for words. After a long while he said, You are willing to give up on yourself. You are willing to become a human's mount and dog just to go against me? Don't forget. You're no match for me. Onyxia had an indifferent look on her face. Fallen? Perhaps. Although the humans are now saying that I have forsaken the darkness for the light, whether or not I should fight with you, I really have not thought about it. Perhaps, with Xueqi's encouragement, I might really have the courage to fight you. Nefarian suddenly remembered something. Wait, Onyxia, did Xueqi bite you on the back of your neck? A rare blush appeared on Onyxia's dark dragon face. Mortals would not be able to tell the difference, but Nefarian, who was of the same dragon race, could tell at a glance. You. At this moment, Nefarian was on the verge of breaking down. Regardless of whether he admitted it or not, he seemed to have become the brother-in-law of a lowly human that he looked down on. If it was not an illusion but his real body, it was very likely that he would have vomited blood at this moment. You useless thing. From today onwards, I will no longer admit that I have a shameful sister like you. You are exiled, Onyxia. Every black dragon will see you as an enemy. Nefarian said ruthlessly. Unfortunately, he was only halfway through his sentence when Onyxia's invisible pretentiousness choked him back into his stomach. But Xueqi has already spoken to Alexstrasza. He said that after observing me for a period of time in the Dragon Slumber Shrine, he will consider conferring me the title of Earth Guardian. Nefarian spat. If he was an old man with a weak heart, he might have died of a heart attack. He and her father, the Wing of Death Nesario, had cheated the other 4 dragon clans in the ancient war. That was why the Black Dragon Clan had the glory of suppressing the 4 dragon clans for 10,000 years. In the circle of black dragons that were popular for being sinister and cunning, most of them saw Nesario's betrayal as a wise and heroic move. Well, now the title and responsibility that their father did not want and spurned back then, had actually been taken back by his own sister. Wasn't this a slap to the face for him and his dead father? Not only was it a slap to the face, but it was also a slap to the dragon teeth. All the harsh words and all the vicious curses that Nefarian could think of were stuck in his throat. He could not say anything for a long time. You. How are you? You've got guts. You've obviously fallen shamelessly, but you've actually fallen to the point of reason. Onyxia. I'll give you one last chance. Immediately fly to the highest point of the Blackstone Tower, kneel to me, and beg for my mercy. Otherwise, when I'm free, I'll definitely hang your dragon head on the main entrance of the Blackstone Fortress, and show all the dragons in the world your final fate. Before Onyxia could answer, she suddenly saw the flash of a portal beside her. A burst of light lit up, and Xueqi's figure appeared on the dragon's saddle on Onyxia's back. Xueqi patted her lightly, and Onyxia immediately understood. She immediately descended, and her huge body shrank at a high speed. In the blink of an eye, she turned into the appearance of Countess Katrana. In front of Nefarian, Xueqi hugged Onyxia from behind and gently bit the back of her neck. Onyxia did not resist, and just let Xueqi do as he pleased. Nefarian's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets when he saw this. Unfortunately, he could not stop all this at all, because he was just an illusion here. Looking at Nefarian, who was trembling with anger, Xueqi laughed, and directly made Onyxia gasp for breath. Yo! Nefarian, you seem to have forgotten something, right? Do you remember? Who let your father's head be hung on the main entrance of the Dragon Sleep Shrine? Nefarian shuddered, and immediately recalled the horror of Xueqi in the past. That's right. It was this seemingly inconspicuous mortal in front of him who single-handedly planned 2 ambushes. The first ambush directly killed the strongest of the black dragons, Nethario. The second ambush directly subdued the noblest female Onyxia of the black dragons. Yes. Nefarian, you're the target of my 3rd hunt for the black dragons. Chapter 1169. Nefarian, do you dare to come out of your lair and fight me? Xueqi's declaration of challenge was so domineering. Onyxia's beautiful eyes flickered, revealing a rare infatuation and fanaticism. How could the noble princess of the Black Dragon submit to a mere mortal? Yes. Only such a great man with such spirit. Only such a peerless powerhouse who drove the world forward. That was enough for her to be willing to submit to him. She witnessed with her own eyes how Xueqi completely overwhelmed her brother in terms of aura. This feeling, which she did not know was whether it was depravity or sublimation, dominated Onyxia's entire soul in an instant. Violent and blazing. That's right. This is the kind of male I want. It was impossible for Duke to hear Onyxia's shouts, and even more so, he didn't know that this was the ultimate weapon against Onyxia, a person who worshipped the strong to the bone. Nefarian was stunned. He was truly stunned. For a moment, he almost wanted to agree to Xueqi's challenge on the spot. A second later, Nefarian shrank back. Although Xueqi's reputation among the mortals was like the sun in the sky, it was simply unbearable in the Black Dragon clan. How did Nethario die? How did Onyxia die? Didn't he still fall into Duke's trap and die? Xueqi made it sound like a duel, but who knew if he would be the one challenging all the powerhouses of the Alliance and the Horde, as well as his disappointing sister? He had no way of knowing what the molten core looked like, but Xueqi had obviously freed up his hands. Moreover, as a rare great scientist in the Dragon Clan, Nefarian had always believed that with the passage of time, the chance of victory was on his side. When he thought of this, his refusal was logical. Humph. I refuse. You're just a mortal. You're not qualified for me to accept your challenge. Of course, if you and your laughable teammates have the ability to kill your way to my throne at the top of the Blackrock Spire, I don't mind personally granting you eternal death. Hee. Nefarian's phantom disappeared after letting out a few pretentious chuckles. Xueqi heaved a sigh of relief when he felt Nefarian's consciousness fading away. He immediately teleported back to Karazhan with Onyxia. As soon as they stepped out of the portal, Onyxia turned around and revealed a bright smile with a blush. Yo! My dear master, why do I feel that you don't want my brother to come out and fight with you? Xueqi patted the dragon butt, and Onyxia immediately let out a coquettish cry of surprise. No sane commander would want to fight on 2 fronts. Because that usually meant defeat and death. Although we used Majordomo to deceive the sleeping Ragnaros, the extinguishing of the flame rune will eventually trigger his nerves. Now the only way to deal with Ragnaros was to scare Nefarian and prevent him from escaping. Of course, it's also a good choice if Nefarian comes out to die. Onyxia's eyes turned craftily. You're afraid that when we're dealing with the Fire Demon King, my brother will come out, right? That's why you're deliberately trying to scare him. Will this work? Xueqi's eyes flashed. Hee. I can't afford to take the risk, but how can he? After all, I'm a man with the titles of Dragon Slayer and Dragon Vanquisher. Since you black dragons like to play tricks, he will naturally overthink things. Overthinking things means that he is not decisive. Nefarian will definitely not dare to come out before his research is completed. Aren't you afraid that my brother's research? For someone who has already peeped into fate, your brother's research is not worth mentioning. Fate? Onyxia felt as if her heart was being violently tugged at. She could not be afraid of the strong, retribution, and revenge, but she was afraid of fate. Moreover, when faced with an existence that knew all your cards but could not do anything about it, the deepest despair would definitely drive her crazy. It was this helplessness and desperation that caused her to surrender. Suddenly, Onyxia knelt down. Master, did you know? You were too domineering just now. I like it. Huh. Xueqi felt that something was wrong. Wait, what are you doing? Didn't you always ask me to taste the dragon taming whip? Now I'm taking the initiative to taste it. Looking up, Onyxia threw Xueqi a flirtatious and slightly bewitching look. Xueqi felt his bones go limp. Dragon taming was just a sideshow. Xueqi's attention was still focused on the molten core. During this period, Ragnaros's consciousness showed signs of awakening twice, but Major Domo, who was under Xueqi's control, managed to fool him. Finally, on the 16th of September, the great craftsman Gerben and Duke Hydasis came together to visit. Xueqi. Everything is ready. A dwarf and a water elemental. Even though they were two different species, they had the same fanaticism in their eyes. Xueqi smiled. I knew you could do it. On the 18th of September, the Alliance and the Horde invested almost all the powerful fighters they could. On the Horde's side, only Thrall was left to guard the main city. On the Alliance's side, General Abendis guarded the Lordaeron continent, Bulang Bronzebeard and Reginald Windsor led the army to guard the Scorching Canyon and Burning Steppes, as well as Turalyon who stayed in front of the Dark Portal. The rest of the people who were above the realm of heroes were all involved in this battle that would decide the fate of the Eastern Kingdom and even the entire Azeroth. If they failed, the enraged Ragnaros would not only destroy half of the Reedridge Mountain, but the entire southern continent. The surrounding air was still hot and suffocating. Grom and the other powerful fighters of the Horde were not used to the cold spray on their shoulders and the strange mask that could be worn at any time. But seeing that all the powerful fighters of the Alliance wore it, they could only force themselves to use it. Fortunately, it was easy to operate. In theory, they only needed to press one of the white buttons on their shoulders to continuously spray out cold mist. According to Gerben, this could prevent them from suffocating to death by inhaling too much hot gas. Major Domo, who was supposed to be one of the leaders of the Molten Core, listened to Xueqi's lecture like a grandson. Wujin felt a strange sense of joy. For some reason, Wujin had a feeling that the hunt for the Fire Demon King would be quite successful. It wasn't just him. Everyone was about to face the powerful elemental demigod, Ragnaros, who was second only to the ancient gods. However, everyone remembered that Xueqi had killed so many powerhouses with no losses. At most, he had let Arthas escape. Everyone was brimming with confidence. Chapter 1170. They were in the northeast part of the Molten Core. As they watched Major Domo walk towards the huge lava pool in the middle of the spiral-shaped land, everyone started to get nervous. They couldn't help but be nervous. The terrain here was terrible. In a sense, this place was like the mosquito coil that Duze used before he transmigrated. The lava was about 10 meters wide and could be passed through after it cooled down. On both sides, there was an endless river of lava. If an ordinary person were to fall into that high temperature, they would probably be dead in an instant. Even if they wore many pieces of fire resistance equipment, they wouldn't last long. The brave Grom had already tried it when he was scouting the area. If he jumped in with almost a full set of iron armor, he would probably be able to survive for a minute. Any longer than that, and even God wouldn't be able to save him. Even so, the other party members wearing 3 pieces of fire resistance equipment could only last 20 seconds at most if they were healthy. Unless they received healing spells midway, they would still die. Unfortunately, the other party members couldn't wear as many fire resistance equipment as the warriors who were carrying Ragnaros. Otherwise, their damage output would be reduced. It was almost midnight. This was the best time of the day to attack. Although this was almost negligible to the Fire Demon King, it was still better to have a higher chance of winning. Everyone heard Xueqi shout, "Last 3 minutes. Everyone, please check your status again. King's Blessing, Blessing of Power, Blessing of Wisdom, Arcane Wisdom." Apart from that, Magni, who was carrying Ragnaros, started to drink the lung cocktail, made from the Cursed Land's wild boar lung slices. He also drank the Titan potion, which could increase his stamina. The Rangers checked each of their arrows, and the bandits carefully applied a special potion to their weapons. Of course, none of this could compare to an enchantment, the fire-extinguishing enchantment provided by the Hydrathea water elemental. This enchantment did not appear in the original history. It could easily transform the damage of cold weapons into water elemental damage. Even bandits could use their daggers to stab Ragnaros, who was a combination of fire elemental. This was the key to this battle. Ready! Team leaders, please report. Xueqi shouted again. Team 1 completed. Team 2 completed. When everything was ready, Xueqi finally nodded at the shivering majordomo. Trembling, the manager gave his last warning. You must reveal the secret of the Son of Flames at all costs. You will pay a huge price for your reckless behavior. Speaking up to this point, it was no different from the original history. Who would have thought that the next topic would change? Why don't we give up? Once I summon the true master of this place, all existences will have to face his endless wrath. Not only your puny lives, but even my life will be over. Ha! Wait a minute. Something didn't seem right. Forget it, I don't care about him. He's going to die anyway. Xueqi pursed his lips. Onyxia in human form walked over on the spot with a malicious smile. Majordomo shuddered. His buttocks shook, and he wagged his tail out of habit. In the past, his long tail would have responded to him. Now, more than half of its tail was gone. Not to mention swimming quickly, it could not even stand steadily. The Black Dragon Princess had traumatized him greatly. I'll do it. Under everyone's gaze, Majordomo raised his hands high like a charlatan. After a string of fire elemental incantations that no one could understand, he cried, Ragnaros, the King of Flames. He is older than this world itself. Now it's too late. Be it me or you, surrender before him. Surrender before everyone's doomsday. No one paid attention to his pitiful cries. Everyone focused on the center. Everyone could clearly feel that the lava pool at the center that had been calm a moment ago had suddenly begun to boil. It was like a fountain, spewing higher and higher. Then, in less than 3 seconds, the high-spewing lava and the fire elemental particles in the air gathered at high speed, forming a huge figure that was breathtaking. Below it were nearly 10 cone-shaped tornadoes of fire that gathered in a clockwise or anti-clockwise direction. Moving up, there was a slender waist that did not match its burly figure. Above it was an inverted triangular upper body. On its abdomen, there were more than 10 golden metal plates that seemed to be embedded in it to protect Ragnaros' abdomen. Then there was a well-defined breastplate, a pauldron made of 3 sharp rocks, and a gauntlet that kept flashing with fire. On his back was a pair of wings that looked like flying wings, and on his huge right arm was a large divine artifact hammer that had a head the size of a house. Hand of Savras, Ragnaros the Balrog. Looking at the golden light on the hammer and the huge metal protrusions on the hammer head, it was hard to imagine what would happen to a mortal if they were hit by such a huge hammer. When Ragnaros woke up, he immediately saw his servant kneeling in front of him. He did not care about the reason at all and asked, Why did you wake me up? Majordomo, why did you disturb me? Majordomo secretly glanced at Xueqi, who was not far behind him, and said the line that he had prepared earlier. It's because of these invaders. They broke into your temple and wanted to steal your secrets. Xueqi squinted. He compared the conversation between his memory and the system elf that he had left in his retina. He finally realized what was wrong. Majordomo did not call Logger master. Ha! What the hell is this? Even so, Ragnaros was enraged as expected. Fool, you let these worthless bugs into this sacred place, and now you've even led them to me. You disappoint me, Majortus. You disappoint me. After saying that, Ragnaros did not even wave his hammer. He raised his left hand high up. Every mage could feel a large amount of fire elements turning into streams of light, and being forcibly pulled out of Majordomo's chest by Ragnaros. Majordomo screamed, My flames, please don't take away my flames. Unfortunately, his power was bestowed by Logger. So was his life. When the Fire Demon King withdrew everything, he fell to the ground like a dead snake. He fell into the lava pool with a splash. Chapter 1171. Ragnaros turned his head and said angrily to Xueqi and the others, Now it's your turn. You foolishly pursued Ragnaros' power, And now you're about to see it with your own eyes. Go to hell, mortals. Along with his thunderous voice, the fire demon king Ragnaros raised his huge red and black warhammer high. At this moment, the entire hero group remained unmoved, and only Xueqi snapped his fingers. Asterisk rumble. Rumble. Asterisk a rumbling sound that shook the entire lava world suddenly came from afar. Ragnaros was stunned. The sound came from afar and spread at high speed, and then even the ceiling of the rock cave where Ragnaros was located began to tremble. Under the illumination of the lava, the stone pillars and the load-bearing rock walls that supported the giant cave creaked and shook incessantly. Sand and stones fell one after another, as if this not-so-small space could collapse at any time due to the violent earthquake. Ragnaros himself was the largest fire elemental, and mortals would not be able to tell anything from his so-called expression. As the overlord of the elemental world who had once dominated the ancient Kalimdor continent, how could Ragnaros' power just be ordinary? Mortal! What have you done? His angry roar was accompanied by a copious amount of pressure that spread in all directions. Just his roar alone caused the rivers of lava on both sides of the stone path to react. It was as if every drop of hot lava in the surroundings had increased in temperature by a few thousand degrees after hearing his voice. The rivers of lava made a continuous gurgling sound, as if fanatics were loudly praising Ragnaros as the burning world, the master of fire purgatory, and the mighty name of the fire demon king. The melee professionals closest to the fire demon king were the first to bear the brunt. After all, most of them were battle-hardened and determined. As for Kalia and Sally, who were participating in a battle of this level for the first time, their faces were deathly pale. It was unknown whether it was because they were frightened or because the temperature was too high, but sweat poured down their foreheads like rain, gathering into small streams and sliding down their beautiful faces. Their eyes alternated between pitch black and red. Their wills were like a lone boat that had strayed into a river of lava, about to be engulfed by a fiery hell at any moment. Just as they were trying their best to hold the new epic-level staff blessing in their hands, encouraging themselves with the will of the priests to not succumb to the terrifying pressure of the fire demon king, the cold aura that had been protecting each and every one of them suddenly intensified. Yeah. Ragnaros, the fire demon king. It seems like you haven't learned your lesson from your defeat in the War of the Sovereigns. Is it because you've been asleep for too long that you've forgotten that this is the era of mortals? Xueqi played it down, but his voice was clear, causing the weaker members to tremble. The frost aura emanating from Xueqi's body was so strong that even Queen Sylvie, who was slightly closer to him, could not stand it. Her face turned pale and her teeth chattered. Even so, the stubborn Servanas never left Xueqi's side even half a step. Sorry. Xueqi turned his head and said softly. He then quickly adjusted his magic circuits and the output of frost elemental energy. Jaina and Ronan looked at Xueqi in shock. This was the first time they had seen Xueqi unleash his frost elemental energy. After entering the molten core, he had reminded Ronan time and time again that an individual's strength was limited. There was no need to fight against the entire flame world with Breaking Dawn magic. Why did Xueqi take the lead to violate this iron rule? Did he dare to use mere mortal strength to fight against a demigod elemental king who had the terrain advantage? Xueqi drew his sword. Although it was a little inappropriate for the strongest pharaoh to slash someone with a sword, Xueqi had indeed drawn his sword. More than 50% of his mana was poured into this sword, and it shot towards Ragnaros' left arm like a bolt of lightning. A streak of icy cold light streaked across the sky. In his field of vision, it even more so split this scorching hot world into two. Amidst the sky full of sparks, everyone, including the fire elemental servants hiding in the river of lava, saw Ragnaros' right arm suddenly explode into a sky full of sparks. Then, a hole large enough for a carriage to pass through appeared on the arm below his right wrist. There were traces of cold air on the hole, and frost elemental energy swirled there like an ice tornado, resisting and wearing away at the endless fire elemental energy in Ragnaros' body. The Alliance and Horde heroes all opened their mouths wide in shock. They could not understand what was going on. They could tell from the frost aura that Xueqi had used up a large portion of Xueqi's mana. To them, this was like hitting a rock with an egg. Why did Xueqi make such an unwise move? Ragnaros laughed sinisterly, but his smile froze in the next second. It was as if he heard the most inconceivable sound in his life. Xueqi's seemingly unplanned attack was just the beginning, and it was far from the end. After Xueqi's frost sword pierced through Ragnaros, the remaining force of the sword did not dissipate. It directly shot into a huge lava wall 250 meters behind the Fire Demon King. The cold light sunk deep into the wall, and there seemed to be no more sound. Just a moment later, a rustling sound came from the depths of the stone wall, as if something had broken. It was as if Xueqi's sword had touched a taboo in the stone wall. There was a loud bang, and a huge water column suddenly sprayed out of the deep cave, instantly lowering the temperature of the entire huge cave by at least 10 degrees Celsius. Xueqi waved the divine sword Gandalf. This time, the sword light was not as strong as before, but it was still sharp. Even if Lager wanted to stop Xueqi, he could not stop him from destroying the huge rock walls around him at high speed. When the originally solid rock layers crisscrossed and cracked, more water columns sprayed out. In this space that was originally surrounded by flames and rocks, everyone saw a strange scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Countless water columns of different sizes sprayed a huge amount of water at the Fire Demon King like a sprinkler. However, before all the water reached his huge body, it was instantly evaporated by the high heat around the Fire Demon King. Clouds that were visible to the naked eye appeared around Ragnaros. It was water vapor that evaporated from his high temperature. The water vapor did not directly hit Lager. Instead, it slowly rose and circled above his head to form clouds. Xueqi smirked. "Sorry, Great Fire Demon King. It seems that from today on, your molten core will become history." Chapter 1172. At this moment, there were huge cracks everywhere inside the molten core. They extended in all directions and separated to the left and right, forming a deep valley and two roughly parallel edges on the ground. When they spread to the sides of the lava rivers, the overflowing lava inevitably began to pour into the huge deep valley. However, at the bottom of the deep valley, there was also a huge amount of seawater spewing out. Fire and water fiercely intersected in every corner of the molten core, making loud sizzling sounds and rising water vapor due to the high heat everywhere. "Impossible! How did you do it?" Ragnaros finally let out a cry of surprise. Xueqi elegantly drew a semicircle from right to left with his hand and finally placed it on his left shoulder, giving a noble salute. This is the perfect combination of science and magic. From the beginning, Xueqi had never thought of relying on his 40 companions to rush into the molten core and kill Ragnaros. The molten core in reality was not that simple. At the very least, after so many months of travel, Xueqi's system had scanned traces of Ragnaros' power everywhere. How could a demigod of the fire element, who could spread his power all over his territory, be defeated just by killing his main body? Xueqi had to prepare for the worst. The entire molten core was the backing of Ragnaros, or even more exaggerated, the molten core was Lager, and Lager was one with this underground world of flames. Using the power of mortals to fight against the entire world of flames, what was the difference between this and an idiot sticking his penis into the ground and saying that he had forcefully pushed down the entire planet? Ignorant and ridiculous. What Xueqi wanted to do was to use the power of Hydraxia's water element and the help of the dwarven miners to destroy the entire molten core. It sounded like a fantasy, didn't it? But after careful research and comparison of the ancient Kalimdor continent and the other continents of the Azeroth, Xueqi came to a shocking conclusion. The 4 largest continents of the Azeroth were most likely floating islands or semi-floating islands that were not closely connected to the Earth's crust. Come to think of it, it was precisely because the Well of Eternity exploded that the entire continent was blown into 4 big pieces. That was how Kalimdor, the Eastern Kingdom, Northrend, and Pandaria came into existence. However, 10,000 years ago, these 4 continents were not in their current positions. This place was originally a deep sea that stretched as far as the eyes could see. As a transmigrator who understood the continental drift theory, Xueqi was sensitive to this. The foundations of the continents were not strong. It was very likely that when the 4 continents exploded, they bumped into a huge bulge at the bottom of the sea, which then stabilized and became what it was today. With the help of the Haitian water elementals, Xueqi finally knew that Ragnaros had activated a huge active volcano that was originally located in the deep sea. Through the eruption of the volcano's magma, a flame passage was created from the bottom of the Eastern Kingdom's continent all the way to the floating continent. Xueqi did not know if the passageway was as sturdy as he had imagined. Xueqi only needed to know that the area below the molten core was actually the ocean. What happened next was logical. The dwarven craftsman, who had once introduced a shield boring machine that was specially used for digging holes and dug an underground tunnel from Iron Stove Castle to Stormwind City in a few years, easily found dozens of shortcuts to the ocean with the help of Duque Dosis and the other water elementals. Just as Duque and Ragnaros started fighting, the dwarven craftsmen at each node detonated the last thin layer of rock, and then escaped through the prepared portal. While Duque and Ragnaros were fighting each other, 20% of the Fire Demon King's precious territory had been flooded. At this time, the powerhouses of the hero group finally knew why Duque had asked them to prepare the underwater breathing magic that the Haitian water elementals had prepared for them, as well as the underwater breathing equipment made by the gnome engineers. At worst, they would flood the entire molten core and fight a water battle with Ragnaros. Humans, elves, beastmen and so on. It was inconvenient to fight a water battle, but Ragnaros was a fire elemental. Would he dare to fight a mortal in the water? The originally violent Ragnaros became even crazier. Mortal! I don't care who you are. I'll make you pay for this now. The moment Ragnaros roared, the huge fire demon warhammer smashed down. The deafening rumble made people feel as if a mountain had fallen from the sky. Hey! Do you want to kill me? Have you asked for my permission? The short man Magni quickly activated Deity's Descent and turned into a large short man. Although his height was smaller than his width looked a little ridiculous, he was still very reliable as a true powerhouse. The axe and hammer in his hands, which were also made of silver metal, crossed in mid-air, firmly blocking the path of the hammer. Clang! With a loud bang, the collision of the three weapons created a huge shockwave, and Duke, who was hiding behind Magni, had his cloak fluttering in the wind. Duque was unmoved. Just this boldness of not even blinking was enough to make the onlookers feel deep veneration. Ragnaros, are you really not going to do anything? We're not ants that you can kill at will, but if you don't save your territory, your hundreds of years of effort will be wasted, Duque reminded Ragnaros bitterly. Duque was right. The entire molten core was a part of Ragnaros' body, and also the source of his power. It was an accident that the Iron Dwarves summoned him, but it was also inevitable. Ragnaros had long planned to return to the land. However, his power was not enough to burn the entire land, and it was not even enough to deal with the Eastern Kingdom. Hence, he had painstakingly accumulated the lava from the depths of planet Azeroth, and piled it up in the molten core. What was stored here was his energy, his ammunition, and his treasures. If he could quickly get rid of Duque and the rest, he could of course immediately turn around to deal with the crisis of the molten core being flooded. On the contrary, he could not quickly get rid of Duque and the rest, so he had to make a choice. No matter what choice he made, Duque would definitely not lose. Damn it! Ragnaros roared and raised his left hand. The ground immediately rumbled. This was different from the passive rumbles from before. This time, Ragnaros actively changed the geographical structure of the molten core. Although the powerhouses were not too clear about the situation outside, they could still see a curved crack extending along the spiral flame pool. This was clearly a circular arc that seemed to separate the entire flame pool from the outside world. Chapter 1173. In the next second, the solid rock layers started to rise, as if they were going to form a dam. No, they were going to form a mountain that completely isolated the seawater, isolating the entire pool of fire from the outside world. It wasn't just here. Rumbling sounds could be heard from afar, and more mountains were rising. Ragnaros was trying to cut his losses and separate the various regions of the molten core to preserve as much territory as possible. Even Jaina and the other ladies who had participated in many battles couldn't help but cover their mouths. Much less William and the inexperienced newcomers to the hero team. Moving mountains and rivers, using the rising mountains to resist the ocean that could extinguish all flames. This kind of earth-shattering power was definitely something that mortals could only look up to. The legendary power of the true realm of gods hadn't appeared on this land for tens of thousands of years. When almost all the ancient gods were sealed during the War of the Dominators, and when the last batch of demigods perished in the War of the Ancients, there were no more such legends in the mortal world, especially in the Eastern Kingdom. But today, even the most exaggerated power, which was only described in a few words in the oldest human poems, was finally displayed in front of mortals. Even the bravest and boldest mortal warriors didn't dare to imagine what would happen to them when they only had the power of mortals and faced such a terrifying fire-type demigod. However, there was no doubt that the mortals had the upper hand now. All of this was because there was a hero who could allow mortals to stand on equal footing with demigods and true gods. Duke Marcus. After months of preparation, the results were finally showing. Xueqi raised his head 45 degrees and stared at Ragnaros' figure, which was at least 15 stories tall. There was also a fanatical look on his face. It was the taboo excitement of being about to challenge authority and absolute power. This time, it wasn't the outsiders who were weakened by the Titan magic formation that stood in his way. Instead, it was a genuine and incomparably powerful local demigod. He wasn't an individual like Onyxia, but a top-notch demigod who was at the pinnacle of the demigod realm and controlled an elemental domain. Now it was time for him, Xueqi, to personally blow the horn to attack. So what if Ragnaros could control the flames within a radius of thousands of miles? I can extinguish all your flames with a water attack. Logger, so what if you're a top-tier demigod? I used science and magic to block most of your power. Come on. Mad Fury. Attack. If you dare to transfer more power from your base in the Land of Fire, I will gain more. Xueqi's eyes shone brightly. His goal was no longer those artifacts. He had a higher goal, the power that Ragnaros had that could allow him, Xueqi, to step into the realm of God. After all, Ragnaros had just woken up from a deep sleep. He was still a little confused, but he immediately discovered the method Xueqi used to inform his men. Magic message? I, as the ruler of fire, declare that in my domain, arcane energy is forbidden. Luo Ning's expression turned ugly. He was shocked to find that the arcane elemental energy around him, which he used to communicate with at all times, seemed to be afraid of something and began to move away from him. Yeah. Ragnaros, there are still nature, frost, shadow, holy, and so many other elements. Why don't you ban them all? Xueqi sneered and snapped his fingers for the second time. At this moment, the water elemental that had been standing beside Xueqi suddenly reacted. The water elemental of a mage was essentially a purer magical creature. It did not belong to the Hydraxia water elemental faction, but this did not stop the water elemental from using its own method to transmit information to Duke Hydraxis. Outside the fire pool, Duke Hydraxis let out a roar, and a huge waterspout rose from his arms. The waterspout that was hundreds of meters tall easily destroyed the earth barrier that Ragnaros had raised with his divine power. Bastard! Logger almost went crazy with anger. If it was any other day, he could destroy an ordinary leader of the water elemental formation with a single finger. One had to know that in the War of Domination, he had even killed the leader of the water elemental formation, Tidehunter Neptulin. Why would he care about a small leader of the water elemental formation? But now, there was still Xueqi and the others holding him back, and there was also the huge amount of seawater distracting him. He could not concentrate his power for a long-range attack. Ragnaros was really angry now. I have lost my patience. All of you can go and die. With that, he blasted Magni with Rage of Ragnaros. The Avatar state could make the Shorty King immune to most fire damage, but the strong impact still caused Magni to roll away like a gourd. At this moment, Xueqi raised his right hand high and waved it down. This was the call for charge. Without any hesitation, another tall and burly figure rushed over at high speed and stood at the front of the team. Cowhead Chief Cain Bloodhoof. After putting on almost a full set of black iron fire resistance plate armor, he, who was already huge, now looked more like a war machine. The totem pillar that was emitting an icy blue water elemental glow swept horizontally and smashed heavily into Ragnaros' waist. Hey, Ragnaros! I'm here to greet you on behalf of your water elemental father. Old Cow laughed mockingly. Duke blinked. This old bull has mastered the taunt divine skill to the point of perfection. Water and fire were incompatible. It was the same in Azeroth. How could Logger tolerate the accumulated hatred of tens of thousands of years and the fact that Logger had killed Neptulin? The fire elemental formation was originally very irritable, and Logger was easily angered. The Fire Lord Warhammer that was raised high up in the air had been targeted at the damned Xueqi 5 seconds ago. Now, it had become that annoying old cow. Bam! The giant Fire Lord Warhammer clashed with the totem pillar, and a huge ball of flames burst out. However, Cain was able to block the attack easily with the help of his superb equipment, which gave him a massive boost in strength. The old bull snorted and laughed. That big guy only has this much power? Hee hee hee. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't itch. If Ragnaros had legs, he would definitely send this damned cow flying with a kick. When he was about to attack, the Shorty King, who had rolled away and soaked in lava for a few seconds, had already turned into a silver stream of light and charged back with intercept. Little burning man. Come. Let me make you into an eternal candle and put it in the toilet of the Iron Stove Castle to illuminate shit. Xueqi was speechless. Could it be that one couldn't be a good warrior if they didn't have a sharp tongue? Chapter 1174. Taunting could be said to be a warrior's necessary skill. Apart from inexperienced fellows like William who only knew how to attack people, most of them had mastered the art of taunting that could destroy the world. Xueqi had the time to check the situation around him as he used his large frost arrow. The 4 Windrunner sisters kept knocking their arrows, throwing an empty quiver into the lava pool every 30 seconds. Ragnaros's body was too huge, but as a fire elemental chief-level creature, he didn't have any weak points. In other words, as long as he hit the target, he would be able to deal damage. 4 marksmen like the Windrunner sisters, they could even hit the target with their eyes closed. When there wasn't much pressure on the healers, Tyrant also joined in the shooting. Today, she didn't bring the famous white tiger with her. She was wearing a pure white priest robe and playing with her bow and arrow, which made her look a little out of place. On the other side, the group of pharaohs were making frost arrows, including the poor Ronin. He had Breaking Dawn magic power, but he was forced to use ice magic, which he wasn't familiar with. Behind Ragnaros, several phantom-like figures were rapidly restoring the daggers in their hands. From time to time, they would appear and disappear into thin air again. Ragnaros could sense that there were small bugs behind him that were hurting him, but it did not seem to be that serious. No matter how powerful they were, they couldn't compare to killing those 2 fellows who kept cursing him. Of course, there was also the wizard named Xueqi who kept breaking the rock barrier and drawing seawater to deal damage to him. Ragnaros remembered this guy from the mouths of mortals. Compared to the other mortals, this wizard who drew seawater to attack him was the one who dealt the most damage. Almost every pillar of water forced him to use large amounts of fire elemental energy to counteract it. To him, the fire elemental energy was both his strength and his life. He hated that fellow named Xueqi to the core. Hey, Xueqi, can you not attract this big guy's attention? Why don't you carry this big guy? Magni cursed in the dwarven language. He knew that Xueqi could understand him. Xueqi rolled his eyes and silently cast a mirror image doppelganger while a ball of fire flashed, then activated invisibility, and walked away. The next moment, everyone saw Xueqi being sent flying by Ragnaros's flames and falling into the lava. It seemed to have died. Everyone also saw a shameless fellow wearing a priest's attire as soon as he appeared. He openly blended into the group of priests and praised, "Holy light! We can put up a fight with this idiot." At the same time, he cast 2 strong healing skills on Old Cow. As the second warrior to carry Lager, Cain was obviously not treated as well as Magni, who was the main tank. As the pressure on Magni's side was too great, Cain was easily neglected. Moreover, the healer was from the Alliance, so of course, he would save the Alliance members first. Cain felt a little bitter. Who asked him to have thick skin and strong vitality? Heaven to the left, the warrior to the right. Who asked me to suffer? Tat tat tat. Hell, right? It's not like I haven't been there before. Even if the healers couldn't keep up, Cain quietly completed his task and shared the damage for Magni. When 2 powerful and pure holy lights crossed the void and descended on his head, stimulating the recovery of his body. Even the scabs on his hands quickly fell off. Cain was very touched. Ha! Where did this new bishop-level priest come from? Cain took the time to look back, only to see a certain impure being in the group of priests winking at him. Old Cow was speechless. A Breaking Dawn wizard actually knows holy light? Alright. I don't care if you're a part-time or full-time priest, as long as you can heal me well. Xueqi's cameo as a priest was the most beneficial addition to the team's healing lineup. After all, apart from Benedettas, who was very reliable now but would be unreliable in the future, most of the healers in the team were newbies. This was especially so for Sally. She was often unable to heal because she was flustered. On the other hand, Xueqi had a plug-in made by the system and could easily see the HP of everyone in the team. Even if the entire team was very well equipped and filled with potions, They couldn't help but feel uneasy after a long time without receiving any healing spells. After observing for a few seconds, Xueqi decisively let Tyrande return to be the healer. Tyrande, you take care of Magni and Kane. Sally, if Tyrande is sent flying, you take care of Magni. Kalia, you're in charge of the melee team. If you see them getting burned, just cast Recover. Benedictas, you're in charge of the ranger team and the wizard team. Briar Bearskin, you're in charge of the mobility team. If you see anyone injured for more than 5 seconds without healing, you go. It was a very chaotic scene. People were constantly being sent flying, and there were also idiots who were thrown into the lava river. When they floated up, their faces were covered in lava and they couldn't tell which way was north. If it wasn't for Xueqi occasionally switching back to a wizard and using the newly developed spell Frost Hands to pull up those who had fallen into the lava, a few of them would probably have died, such as Valera. She was once sent flying at the same time as Varian. She actually very heroically kicked Varian back in midair, and she flew far away and fell into the river, almost unable to get up. On the other side, Ragnaros had used almost all the skills he could: Rage of Ragnaros, Lava Blast, Elemental Flames, and all sorts of fireball spells of different sizes that were comparable to level 5 Star Dawn wizards. However, the hero team's equipment was too good, and the group's fire resistance was so high that it scared him. Most of the time, when a large fireball smashed into them, they would only shake for a moment, or at most spit out a small mouthful of blood. Ragnaros was also angry. He raised his arms and shouted with a thunderous voice, "Come out, my slaves, and protect your master. I am invincible. Appear, slaves of the flames, your master is summoning you. Let the flames purify everything. Feel the flames of saffron." With these extremely classic lines, Xueqi knew that Lager was about to recruit underlings. As soon as Lager finished speaking, everyone in the hero team was dumbfounded, because they saw thousands of soldiers and horses. Hundreds and thousands of fire elemental elites emerged from the lava pool and charged at Xueqi's team at high speed. Each fire elemental was not huge, but there were many of them. That densely packed number. Although Ragnaros was high and mighty like a cat toying with a mouse, with his arms crossed in front of his chest, as if he was watching a show, there were so many of them. The corner of Xueqi's mouth rose. Thousands of soldiers and horses? I have them too. Chapter 1175. This time, Xueqi didn't mingle with the priests anymore. He switched to a sorcerer and summoned a bunch of water elementals with a wave of his hand. It wasn't just him. Ronan, Jaina, and the other sorcerers quickly followed suit and summoned their own water elementals. Under normal circumstances, a sorcerer could only summon one water elemental at most. At the Breaking Dawn level, this limit would be lifted, but there would still be a limit. However, at this moment, everyone could only see water ripples around the sorcerers. Water elemental elites kept popping out from the semi-illusory spatial magic circle. In the name of Neptulin, the Tide Hunter, I shall purify you. They fearlessly charged forward and attacked their enemies with frost elementals. This scene was simply a continuation of the earth-shattering War of Sovereigns from 25,000 years ago. You ungrateful water elementals! Do you still want to defile my holy land? Ragnaros was furious. He was really furious. Originally, when summoning the fire elemental to save the day, he would look high and mighty, standing there and watching his underlings fight with the mortals. But when he saw Duke shamelessly attracting his enemy, the Hydraxia Water Elemental Legion, he no longer cared about the restraint of the strong, and directly smashed down with his hammer. Clang! This time, it was Old Bull Kane who took the hit in place of Magni, who had temporarily cancelled his deity's descent state. Bastard! 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 You should all be burned to ashes. Not only did he attack the two most detestable warriors, Ragnaros actually swung his war hammer at the rest of the mortals in a very unruly manner. The formation was already a little messy from the impact of the flames, and it became even more chaotic. Lager's attack frequency wasn't high, but it was very powerful. When he used his height to attack the ranger team and healer team outside the two lava rivers, even Magni and Kane couldn't reach him. The four Windrunner sisters used all their strength to barely dodge the attack of the divine weapon Warhammer at high speed. Even so, the powerful flame shockwave still burned their long legs to varying degrees. Although they could be healed and wouldn't leave any scars, Duque's heart still hurt. Mine. Mine. Those legs are all mine. Lager, you're courting death. Duque could not hold it in any longer. He gave Onyxia, who had been pretending to be a mage, a meaningful glance. The Black Dragon Princess understood immediately. Roar. An intimidating dragon roar resounded throughout the underground cave. What? Ragnaros's red eyes, which were condensed from super-high temperature flames, suddenly shrank. He had never imagined that there would be a black dragon in human form hidden in front of him. It was not an ancient dragon that he could easily kill, but a powerful black dragon with the status of a demigod. He immediately sensed that the black dragon in front of him was not in a complete state. It was obvious that he had been injured not long ago and had not fully recovered. Moreover, the black dragon's divine spark was much lower than his. However, a demigod was a demigod after all. Even if there was a difference in strength, he could still pose a sufficient threat to him. Ragnaros aimed his hammer at the dragon's head on the spot. This hammer strike was no longer a casual strike. Instead, it was swift and fierce with a certain degree of swiftness. It looked like it was going to hit Onyxia's head on her agile dragon neck. It also looked like it was going to hit her left wing, and it also looked like it was aiming at her front claws. If it was the Onyxia of the past, she would definitely be at a loss of what to do and would have to choose to retreat. But it was different now. Through the soul connection, Onyxia saw a strange trajectory in her spiritual world. It was the soul message that she sent back to Duque from the part of her soul that she offered to him. The possible attack trajectory of the Balrog's warhammer, which looked like it could smash her brains out, fell into her eyes. Moreover, as her movements changed, the trajectory would also change accordingly. This brand new battle strategy named Duque's Battle Simulation System seemed to have opened a door to her that she had never seen before. Powerful and effective. Just when everyone thought that Onyxia had to avoid the attack, the black dragon made an unimaginable special move. She retracted her left wing and used the claws at the tip of her right wing as a fulcrum to make a right-side flip. When she narrowly let the huge flaming warhammer pass less than half a meter away from her dragon abdomen, her long dragon tail suddenly lashed out like a meteor hammer. The ice armor, which was already installed on the dragon's tail and made from the deep-sea ice in the Hydraxia's water elemental territory, drew a huge arc in the air, and finally smashed on Ragnaros's head. Arg! The Balrog king cried out in pain. For the first time since the start of the battle, he retreated. His lower body that was wrapped in 3 layers of fire tornadoes supported his body and leaned back greatly, barely dodging the second attack from Onyxia's right hind leg. He managed to dodge it once, but he couldn't dodge it all the way. In order to dodge the Black Dragon Princess's consecutive attacks, his huge body was completely exposed in front of the hero group's melee combat team. Especially that group of bastard warriors, they did not hesitate to switch to their berserk mode and beat Lager up. In the blink of an eye, Ragnaros felt that his flame power had dropped drastically. But when he wanted to counterattack, Onyxia retreated. She didn't want to fight him head-on at all. Instead, she flew up and circled around him like a fly, harassing him without hurting him. Black Dragon. Isn't the dragon race known as the strongest race? Where's your manhood? Come on. Fight me head-on. Ragnaros was furious. He threw huge fireballs the size of a thatched cottage at the Black Dragon Princess. Unfortunately, it was of no use at all. Just like how Onyxia wouldn't waste her energy to use fire dragon breath on Lager, Lager's flames couldn't do anything to Onyxia, who also played with fire. The Black Dragon Princess was insanely resistant to fire. Although she wasn't immune to it, she would still be slightly injured if she was hit by a fireball. However, Lager's fireballs weren't dense enough. In particular, in the tactical simulation system that Duque sent, he could clearly see the path of every fireball. If she really showed signs of being hit, there was also a red warning arrow. If she was hit even with that, Onyxia would be getting worse and worse. He threw nearly 1,000 fireballs in one go and actually gave his opponent a 100% dodge. That wasn't a tiny mortal, nor was it a fake illusion. It was a black dragon that was 40 to 50 meters long. However, Onyxia twisted her body to the left while circling at high speed and tucked her abdomen to the right. She didn't even hit a single one. If Ragnaros had balls, he would definitely be having a headache right now. While Lager was entangled with the black dragon, the mortal heroes below silently struck gold. Unknowingly, they had reduced Lager's fire elemental reserves by a large amount. Chapter 1176. Ragnaros was furious. However, no matter how angry he was, how resentful he was, and how easily he lost his rationality, he was still an intelligent creature. Every second, more than 100,000 tons of seawater poured down on Lager. Every second, the molten core territory that gave him power was devoured by the seawater. A water elemental leader was wreaking havoc in his territory, destroying every water barrier he erected, but he couldn't do anything about it. At this moment, he was afraid. Really afraid. It wasn't a scream but a more beastly roar. For the first time, Ragnaros raised the huge Balrog hammer high in the air, ignoring all obstacles around him. The two warriors' provocations, the Black Dragon Princess's guerrilla attacks, and the dozens of water pillars. His eyes were extremely empty, as if he was staring at no one. However, the more it was like this, the more uneasy Xueqi felt. Because according to the system notification, Ragnaros still had at least 30% HP left. Disperse, Xueqi ordered. However, it seemed to be a little too late, because Lager's entire body seemed to have collapsed, and her tornado-like lower body lay where Magni was supposed to be. In the next moment, her arms suddenly swelled, and the house-sized Balrog hammer came crashing down. Boom! Before the hammer hit the ground, it had already produced a deafening explosion in mid-air. It was as if the sun in the sky had transcended space, penetrated deep into the rock stratum, and landed here. Moreover, this time, Lager's target wasn't the thick-skinned warriors, or even the close combat team. She had been targeting the healers from the start. Not only did the few female priests turn pale, even Xueqi's face turned green. Not good. Once the healers were all wiped out, no one would be able to last more than 5 minutes in this fiery hell that Lager had created. The huge Balrog hammer was so dazzling that it rapidly enlarged in their vision. Even Benedettas and Tyrant, who had already run a few steps, realized that it was impossible for them to escape with their own strength, let alone Kalia and Sally, who were frozen in place with fear. The only one who had a chance of escaping the range of the hammer was Brawl Bearmantle, who had transformed into a leopard and was running away. Benedettas's mouth twitched. He looked at the hammer that was rapidly falling on his head and seemed to want to say something. In the end, he lowered his head dejectedly and waited for the judgment of fate. Woo! Sally burst into tears. She didn't know what to do. Xueqi. Kalia pursed her lips and prayed. If this was the last time she prayed in her life, then the person she prayed to would obviously be Xueqi. Tyrant was the only one who, in a moment of desperation, took out her light strike strongbow and shot out an arrow with a string attached to it. She did not know if she would make it in time. At the very end, a huge ice prism suddenly shot up into the sky, like a needle against an awn, and fiercely collided with the huge Balrog hammer. Perhaps this attack was a failure. That was because the frost element contained within it was far inferior to that of the Fire Lord's hammer. The ice prism was only able to resist the Balrog's hammer for about 1/10 of a second before it failed, turning into ice shards that scattered in the air. But it was also a success. In this 1/10 of a second, a white figure had already passed through the shadow of the Balrog hammer at high speed and pounced near a few priests. Ah! Sally screamed because a strong force pulled at her lower abdomen. This force was so strong that she almost squeezed out her dinner from the night before. Kalia's face did not even have time to blossom in surprise before she felt the world spin around her, as if she had seen the sky and earth turn upside down. Only Tyrant's dynamic vision was the best. She gave up on her escape route and turned to bow, making the most suitable posture to deal with the impact. Yes, Benedettas suffered the most. He suddenly felt a huge force on his butt, and then he flew out, falling painfully into a pool of lava to take a bath. Boom! Accompanied by an earth-shattering sound, the place where the hammer had landed splashed up a huge wave of lava that was more than 30 feet high. The solid rock layer rose up in circles like waves, and everything within a radius of several hundred feet was covered in splashing hot lava. Even though the heroes were all wearing fire-resistant equipment, they were still choked by the super-hot wave of fire and could barely breathe. No! Someone cried out. Was the healing team done for? Everyone stared at the place where the Balrog hammer had landed. However, the lava there was tumbling, and even the shape of the ground had changed. There were no survivors. Suddenly, Xueqi's voice rang out. What are you waiting for? Beat him up. Following the direction of the voice, Everyone finally saw the situation of the healing team. They were on top of a protruding rock, and the youngest priest, Sally, was carried by Duque's right hand like a bag. On his right shoulder, Duque was carrying Queen Kalia. That round part was very eye-catching, and his calves were shaking, as if he could hear Kalia shouting something like, "Put me down." Duque's left hand was wrapped around Tyron's waist, and the night elf high priestess stared at Duque in fascination. Cough cough. Brawl was more humane. He ran over to pick up Benedicta's, who was almost shitting his pants from the lava. It was a mess, but at least no one was dead. The heroes all turned their heads and continued to attack Ragnaros in a frenzy. Damn it! Ragnaros was furious. He did not expect that his full-powered attack could not kill a mortal. On the other side, Onyxia weakly transmitted her voice to her master. This kind of attack. If you really want me to take it, I'll take it at most once. No need. Duke spat out a mouthful of turbid air and shook his head, expelling the messy thoughts from his mind. As expected, in a real battle, there were no bosses that only attacked warriors. Only idiots would specifically attack those with thick skin and flesh that could not be killed. When Ragnaros put away his arrogance, he became much more difficult to deal with. Duque roared, "Hydraxis, coming!" When the first word was spoken, the voice seemed to be still in the sky. When the second word was spoken, the voice seemed to be right in front of them. Without any warning, the rock wall behind the ranged team that reached the top of the cave suddenly melted. The black wall suddenly turned the color of azure water. In less than 3 seconds, a water giant as large as Ragnaros appeared. Hydraxis. You have no right to stand in front of me, Ragnaros roared. Is that so? But I'm already standing in front of you. And I'm not the only one. Duke Hydraxis' eyes, formed from the purest essence of water, swept a glance at Duque. Those extremely human-like eyes revealed a look of gratitude. Chapter 1177. Duke Hydraxis' gratitude was sincere. If not for Duque, he would not even have the right to stand in front of Logger, as he had not even stepped into the realm of demigods. But now, he had the chance to avenge his dead master in the war of domination. Duke Hydraxis' heart burned with passion. From an outsider's point of view, the water elemental Duke seemed to have shot out his entire arm towards Logger. Only the wizards could clearly feel that the Duke had actually used the water elemental energy he had extracted from the sea as a weapon. Duke Hydraxis' body was not that big. The two elemental giants, who were definitely monsters in the eyes of mortals, grappled with each other without any fancy moves. On the other side, Duque could finally catch his breath. He first put down Sally, whose body had gone limp, then hugged Queen Kalia's butt and put her down. Kalia's face was bright red, and she even secretly punched Duke's sturdy chest a few times in protest. However, she immediately tiptoed, as if afraid of being seen, and quickly kissed Duke's lips like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Seeing Kalia's neck turn red, and she eagerly ran back to her healing position, Tyron secretly blew into Duque's ear. I really envy Kalia for still being able to maintain her pure heart. Sigh, unlike me, I've been led astray by you. All right, I know what you want, little pervert. I'll come find you tonight. Tyrant was clearly upright and holy, as if she was saying something, but she just had to say such private things. Hearing this, Duque bared his teeth. All right, seeing that the battle is still ongoing, I won't deal with you first. Seeing Tyrant nimbly run to another position, Duque turned to look at Sally, who was on the ground. Something was wrong. Sally was now holding her face with both hands. Her face was like a steamed prawn, white and rosy. It was obvious that she had heard what Kalia and Tyrant had said to him. This huge piece of gossip had clearly shaken Sally to the point where she couldn't think straight. Sally, actually, me and them. It's okay. I swear I'll keep it a secret. Sally suddenly stood up and looked at Duque with a resolute gaze. Unfortunately, I already have someone I like. Otherwise, I would probably also fall in love with a great hero like you, Lord Marcus. Before Duque could react, Sally had already leaned over and planted a light kiss on Duque's cheek. However, I still want to thank Sir Marcus. You're a good person. Then Sally ran away, blushing. Wait a minute. What the hell was that? A kiss from the nice guy card? Holy shit. If I didn't have a harem right now, do you believe that I wouldn't beat you up? Xueqi turned his head and squinted at the arena. He could clearly feel that the density of the fire elements around him was decreasing rapidly. For example, when Xueqi was saving people just now, he used something similar to icicle spell on his legs and used the frost element to propel himself forward quickly. The previous move required 100 mana points, but now it was 50. This was because the suppression of the fire element on the other elements had begun to weaken. The arcane elements that could not be used for a while could now be used. Ronan was the first to sense it and immediately threw a barrage of arcane missiles at Ragnaros. Not only him, but even Onyxia, who had yet to recover from her injuries, strengthened her offensive after Duke Hydasis became a big sandbag. Yes, Hydasis was weaker than Ragnaros and was at a disadvantage in the confrontation of water and fire elements. He could only bitterly make up for the gap in quality with quantity. However, with the help of the hero group and the Black Dragon Princess, the scales of victory quickly tipped towards the coalition army. And with him around, Ragnaros had no chance to deal a heavy blow to the healing team. Xueqi did not do much. At this point, there could only be two outcomes. Either the Fire Demon King would fall, just like in history. Or, you bunch of degenerate and insignificant scum. You've tarnished my holy land. Do you think this is the end? Do you think I'll give my holy land to you as spoils of war? No, never. Die. All of you die. I'll use my last flame to burn all of you blasphemers to ashes. In everyone's field of vision, the gigantic Ragnaros had suddenly shrunk to about 1/3 of its original size. Even so, he was nearly 5 stories tall. Perhaps this was a form of weakness, but it was also a terrifying condensation. He was smaller, but the temperature was higher. The water elemental Duke Hydasis, who could previously rely on external water elements to replenish himself and fight Ragnaros back and forth, could not get close to the Fire Demon King now. The huge water bomb that was thrown out was completely evaporated halfway through its journey. Such a terrifying temperature could only mean one thing. The Fire Demon King was going to self-destruct. Death here was not the end for Ragnaros, whose soul was still in the land of fire. He would be able to regain his life in 10 years. But for the Alliance and Horde, it would be a complete nightmare if all these powerhouses died here. Kill. Mograine was the first to rush over with Ashbringer in his hand. The divine sword that had once killed thousands of immortals used the most dazzling golden light to offset the thousands of degrees of flames on Ragnaros' body. Count me in. The second one was Magni. After activating Deity's Descent again, he charged over with his extremely high magic resistance. The third was Onyxia. As a demigod and a dragon, she had the ability to deal with this attack. To everyone's surprise, there was another person who dashed forward, Duke. He madly operated every magic circuit in his body. With Gandalf, the legendary sword of the white-robed sword saint, in his hand, his body turned into a comet-like stream of light. He soared from the ground like a baseball and stabbed straight at Ragnaros' chest. In the middle of the fire pool, Ragnaros was in great pain. But he completely ignored the attacks of all other existences, even Onyxia, who was also a demigod, because she lacked the courage to fight to the death. Only Xueqi. Not only did this human have the power to destroy him, but he also had an extremely strong and clear determination. This was not just a simple destruction. Ragnaros could clearly feel that Xueqi was almost domineeringly declaring that he was going to plunder the power that originally belonged to him. Ant! Ragnaros roared. The ultra-high temperature of tens of thousands of degrees formed an almost absolute fire domain, and all the elements within the domain were engraved with his mark. Not only the fire elements, but even every drop of lava under his feet and every molecule in the air carried his will and attacked Xueqi at the same time. Chapter 1178. When an Archmage reached the Breaking Dawn level, they could cast many spells that they didn't even dare to think about. Xueqi had once lifted the Windrunner sisters with icicles on the Solder Bridge. Now, he was lifting himself. Using only the icicles that he created in the air, Xueqi used them as fulcrum points to cast Flash. In the eyes of others, the Sea of Fire seemed to have no way out. In Xueqi's eyes, it was just a group of elemental molecules that were arranged and moving in a regular pattern. The principle of Flash was to use highly concentrated arcane energy to tear space apart and teleport the spellcaster's body. When Xueqi cast Flash, the heroes with good dynamic vision could even see the golden sparks when the arcane and fire elements collided at high speed. The collision of elements didn't feel good. Xueqi's mind was clear, and he felt waves of pain. All kinds of sceneries flashed past his eyes at high speed. Screeching sounds that sounded like metal scraping against each other kept exploding in his ears. It was a clash of elements, a test of the toughness of the magic circuit, and a test of the mind. Almost every time he flashed 50 meters forward, the resistance in front of him would double. At first, it was just the difficulty of breaking through the mist, but in the end, it was like slamming his mortal body against the cement floor. The feeling of being crushed almost made Xueqi have a mental breakdown. He made it through, whether it was his body, mind, or soul. Then he saw Ragnaros, whose mouth was wide open in shock. After the last flash of magic, Xueqi crashed straight into Ragnaros' mouth like a shooting star and fell into Lager's chest. Wrapped in a thick layer of ice that kept forming and melting at high speed, Xueqi shuttled through Ragnaros' throat at high speed. It felt like he was taking a bath in lava. It was almost impossible to find the right way in that pitch-black place. Fortunately, Xueqi kept correcting his direction under the guidance of the system. 3 seconds. But it felt like 3 centuries. Even Grom, the bravest warrior of the tribe, opened his mouth in disbelief. Even Aurelia, Sylvanas, Sasha, and Tyrant, who trusted Xueqi the most, couldn't help but cry out in shock. Onyxia widened her mouth that was full of fangs, but all she inhaled was cold air. He had crashed into the body of a fire elemental demigod overlord. What was the difference between this and suicide? If it was Xueqi, who was known as the strongest hero of mankind, could he create such a miracle? Sure. Xueqi can definitely do it. Aurelia burst into tears. She didn't know when, but she, her sisters, and all of Xueqi's lovers were already holding hands. They were shocked by Xueqi's shocking actions and prayed for Xueqi's safety. Xueqi didn't disappoint anyone who supported him. At the moment when all the magic in his body was about to be emptied, he grabbed a huge core with one hand. Core of lava. One of the necessary materials to make fire-resistant equipment. But this time, what Xueqi grabbed was the core of lava of the fire demon king Ragnaros. This core gathered the purest power of Ragnaros, as well as the most violent part of his soul. It could be said that it was because of this core that there was this huge clone in the molten core. Arrogant! A puny mortal dares to touch the divine realm. A flame that seemed to be hundreds of thousands of degrees rose from the core, extending from Xueqi's arm. If Xueqi's first reaction was to cower, then everything would be over. But Xueqi still held the core tightly. Because the flame was the flame of the spirit. It was the final resistance of the elemental demigod. Perhaps Xueqi could start with the easy and difficult ones. Even if he wanted to pry into the divine realm, he could start with the simplest and weakest divine creatures and even snatch the divinity of his own mount. However, this probably wouldn't work. Divinity was the characteristic of a god, and it represented the greatest characteristic of a god or demigod creature. If Xueqi wanted to touch the divine realm, he had to find the most suitable path for himself. Xueqi used the system to scan Onyxia countless times, and the conclusion was that the divinity of the Black Dragon Princess was less than 10% compatible with Xueqi, because it was something of the giant dragon bloodline. Xueqi thought hard. In Azeroth, he was most comfortable with the 3 elements: fire, ice, and arcane. Next were the nature, holy light, and shadow, which belonged to the wind and thunder. It just so happened that he had to deal with Ragnaros, so devouring the clone of the Fire Demon King was the best choice, knowing that Ragnaros's real body was in the land of fire. High-end, grand, and classy. Plus, it was done in one go. If he couldn't even deal with a clone of the Fire Demon, then he could give up on his dream of becoming a god. Ragnaros's spirit backlash was completely within Xueqi's expectations. Ah, hot. Super hot. Ridiculously hot. So hot that he lost all feeling. Xueqi saw his body being burned by the flames. His robe instantly turned to ashes, the hair on his hands and legs were charred in the blink of an eye, and even the ashes were swept away by the tongues of fire. His originally clean skin cracked like dry earth, then rolled up and was forcibly torn from his muscles. It was another wave of heart-wrenching pain. The next moment, it was his muscles. The originally slender and elastic muscles curled into a ball at high speed, and the bloody bones turned white at a speed visible to the naked eye, then charred and finally, even his internal organs emitted an unpleasant stench as they were roasted into charcoal. Xueqi was dead. If the Xueqi in the spiritual world really believed that he was dead, then his soul would dissipate, and he would also die in reality. Unfortunately, Xueqi had already simulated such a violent illusion of a fiery hell no less than 100 times. When Ragnaros's will of fire was wreaking havoc in Xueqi's shallow spiritual isolation zone, Xueqi was also invading the core of Ragnaros and analyzing Lager's soul and will. The most powerful thing about Xueqi's system was naturally its multi-threaded manipulation, analysis, and calculation. If anyone could observe the spiritual battle between Xueqi and Ragnaros, they would be shocked to see that Xueqi had separated hundreds of millions of thin mental threads and invaded the core of the Fire Demon King from all directions. Although most of them were squeezed, attacked, burned, and destroyed by all kinds of mental and will defenses in less than a second after they invaded, there were also tens of thousands of spiritual threads that successfully invaded the core that contained Ragnaros' true will and began to destroy and collect intelligence like a rummaging machine. You're tuning into the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.